All right, guys, welcome to the program. Welcome to the show. This is not Paul Pluter on the Not Paul Pluter channel. Your boy, Patel Philippe, the narrative, as Dirk calls me, La Narrativa, here with you guys, talking some watches this afternoon as MPW, who's first in the chat, says European prime time. I love it. I actually do like doing this time slot with our European friends, our UK friends. I know it's a little early for folks in Asia and Australia, but I guarantee we're going to have somebody from Australia joining us in the chat at some point through the stream. But a lot of hot takes today, guys. I'm going to be talking the Omega first, Omega in space, and I'm going to kind of have to dispel a lot of the bullshit that's being spit all over YouTube. So I'm going to get into that in a bit. I'm going to talk about the kind of 3 levels of independence. Everyone's talking about independence. Watch Time New York is coming up. That's an independent show. And I'm going to talk to you guys about kind of what I see as the 3 levels of independence and kind of, how you navigate those levels, what you should be looking for and what you shouldn't be. And lastly, obviously, just keeping with the hot takes here. A lot of watches coming out. Yesterday, I did dials, dogs, and kind of really, looking at the watch community as well as watch collecting as a whole. So I'm going to be talking about that, like how the watch collecting space kind of fits into the masses and whatnot. So a lot of content today, guys. A lot of stuff on my mind. I've been talking to a lot of collectors over the past 24 hours, whether on phone calls, WhatsApp groups, listening to YouTube and whatnot. So there's a lot to unpack here today, guys. So we're gonna be going for a couple hours here. So we got Timmy Boitano. Nice to see you. We got Dan. Dad, can I borrow your watch? Sorry, Dad, can I borrow your watch? AC3 Rocks. Thanks so much. Canadian Jimmy here, as always. Our enforcer in the chat, our moderator in the chat, the moderator of moderators, Canadian Jimmy. We appreciate you. We got Bufaris Shwachbarak. How you doing? Hopefully you're well this afternoon. Actually, it's evening for you, I would say, but hopefully we're gonna keep you entertained as you go through the evening. And we got Grant, who is joining us from, I believe, Asia. So appreciate you hopping on this early to hear. So first, Omega in space, guys. This watch has been talked about like crazy on YouTube over the past 24 hours. And look, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing, like, just, and I mean, you can go to Oshino Mali's channel, Tim Wright's channel, all these channels that are really simping this watch. And for me, I'm gonna call this out right away. This is gonna be my punchline. This is I'll say it's the kind of it's the nicest watch that nobody's going to care about next week. Okay. That is the Omega. That's the punchline. That's what all of these fucking YouTubers should have put up, at least in my opinion, should have put up as their titles was, this is the nicest watch that nobody's going to give a fike about next week, because that's really what this is. What do we have here? We have a 3861 movement, pretty standard. It's in the moon watch. We've got, a commemorative watch. This is I think pretty key to this whole reason of why no one's going to care about this watch next week. This is a commemorative watch. Okay, similar to how like a Bond watch is a commemorative Seamaster. Okay, this is a commemorative watch, and look, commemorative watches can be popular, right? The Moon watch is a commemorative watch, but it is in and of itself has its own history, both being a commemorative watch and even being a watch in use after the fact. But there's a lot of examples of commemorative watches being successful, but what it's commemorative of is very important. And I mean, this is not the first watch in space, right? It's not the Moon watch, which was a commemoration of the first watch on the moon, which like I said, subsequently after the fact of becoming the Moon watch, went to the moon numerous times. But it's not commemorating, the first watch in space. It's commemorating the first Omega in space. Like who gives a fuck about the first Omega in space? I care about the first watch in space, and I care about the first watch on the moon. I don't care about, the first watch of a brand going to space, right? So that is core to understanding why this watch will not be remembered tomorrow. Is it commemorates something that really is not that important to a lot of, collectors, I would say. I'm going to talk about the collector sphere right now, and then I'll talk about the mass sphere in a second. The collector sphere, right? Like, the watch collectors that look for pieces because they have certain meaning, or they're just special because of something, whether it's a first from innovation or even, a human exploration in some cases, like for example, going to the moon. It's just not commemorating anything that anybody cares about. right? I mean, in the chat, you guys can tell me if you give a flying fuck about a brand's first watch going to space, right? And understanding the history of this too. I mean, it's not like Omega sent these up into space. Those watches were privately owned pieces by those astronauts that took them up into space, right? Like, we're not talking about necessarily the post era of Omega going through the trials and the competition against other brands to to compete for flight qualification from NASA. We're talking about a period of time in space exploration prior to that. I think it was like the Mercury Apollo 8. I think that was that mission or whatever that this specific watch is commemorating. But again, it was a privately owned watch by an astronaut. So, the way I see it is that like we're commemorating something that a, the brand really didn't have much of a tie to. B, who gives a fuck unless you're an Omega enthusiast? Like, who really gives a fuck about the first Omega in space? So from a pure collector perspective, I don't see it. Right, I really don't see it. I'm challenging fucking Oshino Mali, Tim, and all these guys. Whoever's simping this watch, I'm going to challenge you guys because nobody gives a fuck. People care about James Bond, for example, right? That's why those commemorative watches do okay, because people care about James Bond. People care about going to the moon. If we talk about the Explorer, people somehow care about some fake history of the Rolex being the one that Sir Edmund Hillary was wearing, right? Like, people care about those things. I don't think they care about the first fucking Omega in space. They never did, right? That 2012 model wasn't like hot shit. So why is this one going to be hot shit? I need to understand that, right? So then we're going to get into what, other YouTubers are saying and vloggers and bloggers, hey, it's a better size. The previous model was, I think it was like a 42. And, I'm going to show you guys a couple pictures here because I don't want to show you that video. But let's have a look at this watch. Let's see this in detail here. So we've got a 39 millimeter watch. So obviously a better size now for I think most people. And when you're looking at like a watch that may have gone down in size, become a little bit more wearable, I get that. People like that cool bracelet. Again, the faux patina is really subjective. 5 years ago, when faux patina was really kind of starting to come out 5-6 years ago. Like, people hated it, right? They hated watches with faux patina. They're like, what the fuck is this? And now we're so desensitized by it because tons of watches have come out with faux patina. And I'm going to use another commemorative example of a watch that is a cool watch, but honestly, not many of us care about it anymore, is the Omega Seamaster No Time to Die. That is a commemorative watch. People loved it, right? I love it. I think it's a great looking watch. But like, I mean, do people care about that anymore? Like, does anybody really talk about the Omega Seamaster No Time to Die? I mean, there's going to be so many other Seamasters coming out that I think it's just going to be forgotten. I think that's the exact same thing for this first Omega in space. Again, faux patina, I don't mind it. A lot of people don't like it. There's a few other, like, if you want to get really nerdy, there's a few other changes. I think that they put the dot over 90 back on the bezel insert. So there's a lot of pros to this, I think, from a an enthusiast perspective. But I think from another perspective, it's not. We got original OC hopping on. I'm sure he's gonna have his hot take. So let's hear what OC has to say. What do you think?
What's up, Tan?
What's going on, man?
I'm just here to provide point counterpoint. I mean, I understand this watch doesn't check all the boxes for everybody. It's not a sizzling hot watch, kind of like how the Tudor Ranger or the Tudor Black Bay Pro. They're kind of like, they're it for about 24 hours, and then for the people who are really excited about it, it's going to be big. But for the people who aren't excited about it, it's going to fade away pretty quickly. But I mean, the only other thing that I would add is that the Swatch Group is a business, and Omega is a very, very large company. They do over 600,000 watches a year, and their job is to make watches people want. And I don't know how, like, for example, how many of this model do you think they're going to sell in the first 6 months? Wild guess. I mean, ballpark it.
I mean, I think they're going to be fine in the first 6 months. I think after that's really going to be the question, right?
But how many? 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 25,000?
I don't know, 25,000, 10,000.
Okay, so like do the math. Let's say 20,000. 20,000 watches times 7,000 a watch.
I get it.
The calculation.
I get it.
It's an incredibly lucrative release that's probably just this model on its own, bigger than 90% of all the other Swiss brands combined for the year.
Yeah, I
So
get
as
I was
yeah,
gonna say I get that part of it, like the finance part of it, right? Like why the brand is doing it, right? But I will challenge that same statement, and I could say that, like, if they improved other pieces of this watch, they could probably sell more, right? Like they're using a basic 3861 in this, which it's competing against its own. It's really cannibalizing its own other line, which is the Moon watch. Whether you're talking about the white dial, which is slightly a couple $100 more, or the Hesalite, that's a little bit less. So you're competing there as well, right? So you are, while you're saying yes, it's going to sell that, but that could also
yeah,
cannibalize on the other side. What I would say I
it
would have
could,
done,
sure.
yeah, what I would say I would have done differently in this would have been, make that 321 in more production. If it's possible, let's assume it's possible that they could, if they wanted to, make that a manufactured movement in more scale. Put that in this watch. Okay, so immediately you have a watch that you could probably charge a bit more that would separate it from the Moonwatch range. It would avoid having to cannibalize the Moonwatch range, which has a different movement. It could be less than the Ed White and still be special. And I think they could sell more of those, at a higher price point with a higher margin than if they did this. So that's just purely from the finance perspective is the way I would see it.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
again,
just I get I guess the main general point though is that for every 1,000 watches they sell through the boutique, that's $8 million. So 10,000 watches is an $80 million business right out of the gate with minimal R&D, minimal R&D.
yeah, I think my topic today wasn't really about why is the brand releasing this, right? Because I mean, look at the No Time to Die, right? I think that was a fantastic release for the brand. I like that watch. I know a lot of people that like that watch. But like I said a few minutes ago, I'm like, does anybody really talk about it anymore? Like, and with Seamasters continually coming out with new dials, new versions, um, that it just becomes easily forgotten. And that's why I say it's the nicest watch that nobody's going to remember tomorrow.
Yeah. So
And
the top change that you would make, the top 2 changes that you would make to this are what specifically?
yeah, I would add more value to this is what I'm saying,
Okay.
right? Is I think that this does not bring enough value. This is basically dial only. And when it's dial only, like while I said, yeah, I think 10,000, 25,000 would be sold, but at what expense, right? Because again, you're in the exact price range of your moon watch. You have the exact same movement as your moon watch. You're commemorating space like the moon watch. Like I believe that there's going to be some cannibalization there. And that's where I would say that if you add more value to the watch, you put it in a different bracket because between the moon watch and the 321, I mean, it could slide in there and still be a wild success for the brand.
Yeah, there's going to be some cannibalization for sure, particularly people I think who've been waiting for the white dial version of the Speedmaster who are now faced with the prospect of buying this and it might be slightly easier to get. They might switch their request over to this one if it's readily available. So there is going to be some cannibalization for sure.
Yeah, I was talking to Captain about that earlier, because Cap was saying, yeah, like, this could be a great kind of segue watch if you can't get your 321. And I've been on the list for the 321 forever at my AD. Like both Bear and I, we have small ADs in Canada, so they don't really see many of these, and mine hasn't seen one, and neither is his. But as a buyer for the 321, I don't see this as a replacement. I would probably be happy with a Moonwatch. I really just see this as dial only. I like to read this comment from Diego. I paid for this watch over the phone and canceled my order a few hours later. I'll never wear it, and it's way too shiny. I actually saw the one on I don't know, OC, if you saw Lolex's IG, but I saw it on his wrist too. I thought it looked nice. I'm not saying it's not a nice watch.
Yep,
The
I think it looks nice. There's
Yeah,
there's so many features about it that are nice that people like the case, the straight lug case, the flat link bracelet, the patina, the crown. I mean, there are a lot of aspects that people like. Um, I I don't love a couple of things about it, but that's just me personally. But I can see why people do like it. It has the micro adjustment on the clasp. It's got a lot of features.
it does, right? Like it's not a bad watch. That's not what I'm trying to say. I think right now there's a bit of a lull going on in, just watch releases. This is I mean, it's a cool watch to release. I can see why people like it aesthetically, but again, right? I think if I'm trying to also err on people that, watch influencers on YouTube and influencers on the forums and influencers on blogs. It can also get very dangerous in that sense of like either folks that either just don't know, they just may not even understand like how this watch could be perceived by a buyer because they don't have experience, or they're just trying to shill or whatever, or promote. I think it's also important to have a pretty honest opinion from a collector's perspective, where I look at this and I'm saying, and just like Diego, right? I mean, I don't know how much of a joke this is of Diego, but I'm looking at this objectively and I'm saying, would I part with my $10,000 for this? Right. And why would I?
Yeah.
And I just don't see a lot in there, OC.
The interesting thing that they did do, Tan, I'm curious to get your take on this, is that I think one of the main reasons why people want the 321, oh, it's several reasons, but one of them is that it's manual wind and not automatic. And they actually made the 3861 a manual wind version for this particular release, which is, I think they wanted to kind of take away that objection. Like, oh yeah, I'd buy this, but it's automatic and it's not representative of a more authentic vintage piece. They actually said, hey, we'll make it manual. And so that I kind of, they consciously, I think, bridged the gap for those who were waiting for the 321 and to make something more accessible.
Yeah, so the 3861 is the manual wind movement that they use, like I said, in the Moonwatch and in this one. And I mean, yeah, that is more appealing for sure. But again, that's appealing to a purist, right? Like, there's two sides of this, right? And it was my topic yesterday, and it'll be my topic as well today, of the watch collector community or the watch collector sphere, and then the masses, right? Like, a lot of people that I know that just buy a luxury watch but aren't into watches don't like manual wind OC. They really don't. Like, they're
Yeah.
just fucking annoying. I have a colleague at work whose father was in the space programs, and so he bought the watch, to commemorate his father, and he just hates it. He hates the fact that it's manual wind. So in the collector sphere, I would agree that yeah, it's definitely something we want, whether it's for a purist perspective or you prefer manual wind because you like watches. I think this could also be a detriment to the masses because a lot of people don't like manual wind. So two sides of it, right?
Yep.
Um, Diego says this is an incredible watch for new people getting into watches, and I don't mean this in a condescending way. Someone who doesn't own a Daytona. So Diego, I asked this question to Marcelo yesterday, not about this topic, but I had asked him, "What is the best Rolex? Well, what is the Rolex you would recommend?" And again, this is not to a watch collector. You don't know if they're a watch collector or an enthusiast. Just assume that they're from the masses. The best first Rolex you would recommend for them. And he said the Submariner. And I disagree. He said the Submariner, but definitely not the Datejust. And I disagreed, and I said the Datejust, and we went into this whole debate about it. So if the question was asked to me, and I'll ask this to you, OC, in a second. If someone's to ask me, Tan, what's the best first Omega to buy? I wouldn't necessarily recommend this watch, because again, most non-watch collectors, non-watch enthusiasts, I mean, they're going to want something recognizable, right? Status symbol. They're going to want something that is classic, is basically identifiable to the brand. And to me, that is the Moonwatch. It's always going to be the Moonwatch. It's not going to be the Moonwatch in white. It's going to be the Moonwatch in black. Even though everybody on this panel in this chat may say we love the Moonwatch in white, and for the same reason, right? Just because Diego, myself, OC, Tim, Oshin, everybody, we all like the look of this watch. I would not recommend this as a first watch. OC, what do you think? First Omega, if you were recommending to somebody that you don't know if they're going to collect.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the plain vanilla mainstream Moonwatch Professional in black dial is probably the best, or a Seamaster. But if you're not going to go Seamaster and you definitely want to go Speedmaster, then definitely the either the Sapphire Sandwich or the Hesselite, depending on what your preference. But that mainstream 3861 black dial model.
No biggie, Sal. So Sal and I were talking about this earlier. So I was mentioning OC that like WhatsApps have been on fire, phone calls, everything, right? So Sal and I we were talking about it, and he kind of felt the same way as I did. It's released as little to nothing for me. The 3861 Pro is a better watch, better bracelet, and aesthetics. Faux patina is garbage, right? Super subjective. I can see why, because other collectors were like, well, if Omega has this in the case and a random just walks in, do you think that they wouldn't buy it, right? And I'm like, they probably would, but OC, like most buyers, even if you're coming off the lot and you're just coming onto the lot, for example, most buyers still are a lot more informed today. They would have done a Google search or something before walking into a boutique and buying it. I'm not talking about the complete impulse buyers, but probably the majority of other buyers.
No, this is not a first Omega watch for people. This is an enthusiast watch for someone who already has a twisted lug case Moonwatch with the traditional bracelet and they want something different. They want something with more vintage vibes, with the flat link bracelet, with the straight lug case. I don't.
I
I
would
think
even,
if you right.
I was going to say I was even going to go a little further, right? I would agree with it. It's an enthusiast watch, but I would say it's probably an Omega enthusiast watch. Um, I really, again, right? If you're thinking about making a one piece per brand collection, right? Or if you're trying to, Omega's not everybody's favorite brand, and not everybody collects 3 or 4 Omegas, right? You may just want a one and done. A watch enthusiast, I think, may overlook this piece because of just, the sphere of influence of the community, right? Like watch collecting is a very insular community. There's a lot of groupthink that happens in watch collecting. And, I can't see an enthusiast really gravitate this unless they absolutely love the look and that's the only thing they care about, which I think is going to be a minority. I think this is really for Omega enthusiasts that care about, either space exploration watches or the Speedmaster line, whatever it may be. I think it's for them. I don't really think this is even for the mass watch collecting community.
No disagreement there. I mean,
Yeah,
it's got the vintage logo, the vintage applied logo, the vintage Omega text. Yeah, it's for the Omega enthusiast.
I just feel that I disappointed Dear Artifact yesterday because Dear Artifact was in the chat and I was just like roasting the watch, but I think he didn't see it when I was doing it. And then later on, he asked in the chat, "Hey, did you review it?" And I'm like, "You probably hate my review because I was pretty critical of it."
Everybody has a different opinion. It's no big deal.
Yeah, and look, that's why, like for me, even on this channel, right? Like with the way Archie does his reviews and his honesty. We had Mark Hackman on the show a few days ago, former buyer of Crown and Caliber, former employee at Hodinkee. And I asked him that question. I was like, "Hey, like, do you guys ever speak about watch YouTubers like in the offices of Hodinkee and other places?" And he's like, "Look, there's some YouTubers like Archie that just straight up give an honest opinion, what they think, right? Like, there's nobody paying them. There's no, they're not going to ever be associated with the brand. They're just giving you their hot take, right? And you see that, and I think that's where I think a lot of people like that honest opinion. I like hearing it from Buckley, for example. OC Buckley just will give his hot take, and that's his opinion. I think that's more value to me than like people that kind of just regurgitate what everybody else is saying.
Yeah, that's important to be. When you're one of the first, you're allowed. You can give your opinion without being biased by what other YouTubers and other influencers have said.
Yeah. My first comment was people have a hard on for this. Yeah, look, I didn't mean to like, again, I don't want people to misunderstand. Not that I don't like the watch. I do. It's just like the No Time to Die. I like that watch too, right? It's just I don't see it on or somebody who really just like that. And that's really kind of it on this segment here. Rose has to say, just because it doesn't make your pre-C doesn't mean it's crap. It's a decent watch that's perfectly fine for someone. Absolutely, right? It can definitely be a good watch for people that want to be. There's a lot of background noise, those two, by the way. Are you like trimming the hedges? What are you doing?
Neighbors doing some stuff. I'll mute. By the way, but Pete McConville, who's in Australia, who's an Australian watch video guy, he has an interesting question that he posed on his community page in YouTube, and it says, basically the question is, would you prefer that your YouTubers who do YouTube reviews, would you prefer them to be authentic but biased, or fair but inauthentic? So it's an interesting question, right? It's like, do you want them to be authentic but biased, or fair but inauthentic? And I won't share how I voted or what the results are, but
I would just say fair and inauthentic, to be honest with you. Like, I just, to me, bias is, and look, inherently.
No. The choices are authentic but biased as the first choice,
Authentic but biased. Okay.
Or fair but inauthentic.
Oh no, so authentic but biased, because the way I believe is like everybody's inherently biased, right? Like everybody has their own preferences and their own biases like that, right? But at least it's authentic. At least they're giving their authentic take, because you see that all over the place. People see that with me, right? I'm very biased to the Patek Philippe brand. Doesn't mean I'm not being authentic about my opinion of it, right? But that may not be the opinion that you want to hear. But it's like listen to politics, right? You hear, left side, right side, right? And if you're in the middle, you don't really have an opinion. You want to hear both sides. So that's the way I would see it. But I believe that everybody's inherently biased. Next topic I was going to talk about. So we were talking about the kind of levels of collecting, right, OC? And with Watch Time New York coming up, really a very independent heavy event. And I kind of wanted to talk about independent brands. And a lot of people are looking to get an independence, or it's become a hot topic of the day. And I wanted to kind of talk about independence and the fact that not all independents are created equal. So when people talk about, oh, we have to get an independence, because before it was like, if we really talk about the traditional, what people consider the journey was, you get your Rolex, then you get into the high, the Holy Trinity, and you kind of level up like that, right? Whereas today, Rolex collectors are not necessarily going to the Holy Trinity. A lot of them are buying independents, MB&F, FP Journe, all this jazz, right? Um, so independence, the term independence is such a wide spectrum. And, it's funny because when I listen to like George Varkey's talk about buying certain pieces, 5, 6 years ago and getting in early, right? Like maybe it was a different time as well in that there wasn't as many independents. Today, I think that becomes a lot more contentious, a lot more difficult to really pick and choose which ones are going to be the next big winners, which ones are not even going to be around tomorrow. And so let's talk about kind of three levels of independence. So I kind of look at it, and there's maybe more layers to this, but I'm kind of simplifying it in the sense of you got your entry level or your micro brand independence. Everybody knows those. You're on the Archie Luxury channel, so a lot of them will be called shitters. Obviously, independent brands. A lot of people that are very enthusiastic about micro brands. A lot of cool stuff goes into them. A lot of value goes into those watches. Um, if you're from a pure investment perspective, probably not an area where there's ever going to be any gains. But I mean, there are exceptions, to the rule. And even, I wouldn't even, when you're thinking about a brand like Ming, right, that can kind of play into, as I'll see, as kind of either the low tier or the mid tier of the three levels. Because in one essence, Ming is, very much a micro brand. Its cost isn't that high compared to other, micro brands that are kind of at the upper echelon, but definitely has potential because of the popularity, because of the demand, right? But will that last forever? I don't know, right? Because a lot of people that are putting their money into these brands, because think about it, right? Like if you've got 70 grand to drop, and you're going to hold on to that watch for 20 years, are you going to, and you care about value retention, are you going to bet on a Patek Philippe, or are you going to bet on, brand X, right? And that could be, I'll give you an example, Simon Brett. We've got Raoul Paresh, right? Like these brands that are very, cool and GPHG winners and all this stuff. But like today, can you really make that bet of saying that's going to, outperform a Patek Philippe, right? Like I was the first to even come on camera and say, look, I made a mistake. I had an allocation for an FP Journe Chronomètre Bleu in 2017 at Manfredi, and I just was fucking didn't want to wait the year. And it was like it wasn't even much of a deposit, like 10% deposit or something. I didn't even want to wait. And then now, obviously, today I'm kicking myself and, for not taking that deal back then. But yeah, three levels of independence. I'll grab this super chat real quick, OC, and then I'll get into them. No Biggie Sal, $5 for Satan joining the panel, and Tan's always insightful take.
Thank you.
All right. What's Rose saying? Rose saying indie watch purchase pre-COVID equals you are serious and no shit. Exclude all brands that have ever attended. Wind up this conversation. Yeah. Well, I mean that is the lowest level, Rose, of independence, because the term independence, if you hear it on amongst collectors, like the micro brand collectors, they say the term micro brand, but they also say the term independent. So not mutually exclusive, but that's definitely that area of where people play in for independence. Now let's get into the mid tier where I think most people care about. I have a brand here on the screen, H. Moser and C. I can name other brands that I would consider in this kind of mid-tier independence.
Do you have a price range here, like between 5 and
like
20,000 or 5 and 30,000?
Exactly. Like think of like where Brumont and Ming and them end, and then we're getting into like Moser, we're getting into Chopek,
Yep.
we're getting into. So I'm going to name a couple of the brands, right? So really, what we would consider luxury watches, quote unquote. But that are independents. But these aren't like crazy priced independents. We're not talking about Philippe Dufour's. We're talking about really, something that I would say is affordable to most collectors, where they would have a decision to make from an opportunity cost perspective amongst Rolex, amongst probably some low price Patek Philippe's, Vacherons, maybe AP Royal Oaks and whatnot. Like OC said, right? We're getting into not above 100 grand maybe. So it could be anywhere from 5 to 100, right? So we're gonna have a lot of different groups in here. I'm gonna exclude like Patek Philippe and really the traditional brands that we know from the past. I'm gonna talk about the newer brands. H. Moser C. You got Chopek, you've got Laurent Ferrier, you've got a few other ones in there, right?
Depatune.
de Bethune, a lot of them, right? We've got a lot of brands in this range. And this is where I think it becomes, very contentious because we're talking about real money in the micro brand sphere. Again, it's all relative to, people's income. But I think for the most part, if you're listening to the show, you're into luxury watches. So if you're buying micro brands, you may not be taking too much of a hit to the bank. But when you're getting into Mosers, you're getting into Chopecks, you're getting into de Bethunes, you're getting into Laurent Ferriers, you're getting into serious money for a lot of people. And this is where it becomes very difficult because are you going to play that same bet around buying I don't know, a Calatrava, a 5212 weekly calendar versus getting a Moser versus getting some form of an Antarctique, right? Like, and there are people that want to play that bet, OC, that feel that, yeah, you know what, this is going to be the next big brand or this is going to be the next FP Journe and, it's going to spike and I'm going to make money. I think in this field, OC, is really where it's going to be really difficult is there's a lot of buyers in this, in this range, and there's a lot of different non-independent watches that people are going to want to buy. And I'll give you one example, right? My 5320 perpetual calendar, I seen it on Moda for about mid 50s right now. That's around the same price as a Meteorite Pepsi. You know what I mean? And if you're in the watch collecting sphere and in the masses, are you going to take a Meteorite Pepsi or are you going to buy a random Moser, right? Like, this is why I think this is going to be always very contentious. Full screen rose. Yeah, look,
Don't
if
full
rose.
screen me. Don't full screen me.
All right, OC, what do you think, man? We're in that mid range. How do you see this
Well,
playing out?
you're talking a lot about how well those brands or those particular references will hold value. And I
That's right.
think when you're in that mid range, $30, $40, $50,000, Laurent Ferrier, de Bethune is higher than that, 80, 90,000. Romain Gaultier. I think what buyers are looking for is mainly distinctive design. So when you look at Moser, Romain Gaultier, Laurent Ferrier, they all don't look alike. They're not cookie cutter like other like brands that you like dress watches or sports watches. So they all offer something that an independent collector is looking for, something that they can connect with in terms of a different kind of design and a different kind of look and shape. That's what I think really drives some of the independents in the $30,000 to $50,000 range.
So this is a really good point. And Captain and I were talking about this as well earlier about design, right? Because I agree that a lot of today's buyers are looking for a design, a look that's a lot more contemporary, a little bit more funky, a little bit different, right? Like, if you got the same money to buy a perpetual calendar, a very classic design, a very classic, maybe old man watch, and you can buy an MB&F LM101, right? Like, there are those buyers that are seeking, like you said, a certain design element. Now, the real question then comes in again, back to would this be a safe bet or not? Is, will that design hold the test of time? We've seen many quirky, designs from the past. Think of AP Cobra and all these weird watches that existed that 30, 40 years later, if you held on to that, is that going to be in vogue, right? Is that really going to last, right? Whereas, wouldn't you think that maybe traditional watchmaking may last longer? I don't know, right? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, but that's where I see it. It's still being very contentious and dangerous because design and fashion change over time. And that does not mean that this MB&F Moser that I have up on the screen, which is a beautiful watch, but wildly, wildly tall in terms of its thickness. Like, I mean, it's not really something I think that would really stand the test of time.
I don't think they care. I don't think they care. I mean, if someone buying a Resence or an Armin Strom or Arnold and Son or any of these brands, I don't think that's even in their top three criteria, whether that
Yeah, but
particular style or the
the
value.
topic is not the psychology of the buyer, right? The topic is whether this is a smart buy over something
Okay,
traditional, right? That's
fair
really
enough.
the
Yeah,
topic, right?
yeah, yeah.
Like,
And
you know,
on that topic, yeah, I totally feel you.
because this is why I'm talking more about the value retention part of this, OC, because a lot of people that are, considering independence, and again, I'm not talking about the buyer that can bespoke, and has a good, eye for what they want and have all the money in the world to really spend on what they want. I'm talking about the buyer that's probably sitting in the chat that's got 70 grand, 50 grand, 60 grand, and has the choice, right? I have 70 grand. I could choose to buy a Lange Datograph or I could choose to buy an MB&F LM101, right? Two different ways to look at it, traditional versus contemporary, and that is where, I'm trying to tell the public that, like, this range is very, very difficult. I would say the only brand in this kind of category that I think has real longevity is Moser. I think their business is very well laid out. I think they have, obviously the leadership right now has a lot of history in working in watches. The Milan's father was head of AP for a while. The Milans, obviously are very passionate about, watchmaking, and I think they do a really good job interacting with their customers. So probably the one brand I think that has the best shot at surviving is Moser. But also, I think that's also when you see in the public why these, like, I see a Moser like a Grunefeld, right? But I don't see a Grunefeld having the longevity of a Moser, you know. Um, and so when you're buying a Grunefeld because everybody is talking about it online, like, oh, Grunefelds are amazing because of X Y Z, or a Chopek is amazing because of X Y Z. It's like, well, I mean, I don't know. I don't really see it in that. Are these brands really going to last? Are they going to be able to get off the ground with these models and then be able to continue sustaining their viability over time, right? Like, I just don't see it. And so that's why I would shy away from independence in this range. I think that if you're really looking for that score to actually, have good value retention and make money, is you're going to have to play in the really high end range, right? We're talking Reshepis, we're talking DeFores, we're talking Roger Smiths, and there are a lot of newcomers to the game that are in there. Bernard Lederer is in there. You've got, I think, Raul Pagesh is playing in that space. You got Simon Brett playing in that space, and that's where it becomes difficult. So I even asked couple collectors, like, Simon Brett is like in the subscription, kind of like how they did it with Larico C type of program, right? So if you're buying a Simon Brett and you're and you're going through this like subscription type model, I'm just like, man, like, I mean, unless I'm looking for a quick flip, like, how's this really going to last me over time and continue to be of something viable over time? I don't know whether it's serviceable or what have you, right? Again, a lot of questions I would ask that brand. But
I
just
think the
very, very.
key. I think the key with Simone Bread and some of the others like that is limited production and exclusivity. I think they want to use those attributes to brunt any potential fall in value or any potential risk to the buyer that the brand is going to fall out of favor or not be in vogue.
Yeah, but like I hear that argument a lot, but like I say, not everything that's limited is desired, right? Like, just because it's made of 5 pieces doesn't mean that, like, yeah, they might sell the initial 5 pieces to enthusiasts, investors, whatever, but that doesn't mean that when it hits the secondhand market or auction that anybody even fucking wants those things. So I mean, there's lots of examples of that in the past. Dr. Bob's Nightmare is asking about Maurice Grossman's. I think Grossman is in the same league or in the same boat as these guys. They make great, they have great pieces. They make, great watches. But they got an uphill battle, I think, against a lot of other more established brands that I think can just lean in and maintain dominance over, these smaller independents. And that's where I'm saying is, like, if you're drinking the Kool-Aid of, like, I gotta go, hard into independence, I think, you do have a chance of getting burned pretty bad. And if you don't understand the different levels of independence and the separation between, a Moser is not a Resheppi, in many ways, not just in watchmaking, but desirability, collectability, Mosers sink very, very quickly. Whereas Resheppis don't necessarily sink. So what does burned mean? Whole milk. I know whole milk, MCM, Russ. Yeah, I'm gonna get the detractors here. But I do like the challenge. What does burn mean? Look, whole milk. I think there's a chance of them definitely putting money in, and I'm talking about the people whole milk that are choosing from an opportunity cost perspective to pick independence solely because they believe that independents are the future, that these other brands are not going to survive and or are just not the better choice when you're talking about opportunity costs, purely from how's it going to perform in the future from their value retention perspective. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I can't see Grunefelds, and we even see it in the market today. A lot of Grunefelds going down, just because I think the luster wears off, and people just they desire other things in
Are
that price range.
available on secondary market for a lot less than introductory?
Sorry, you cut out at the start. You said something
Are
was more available
are
than.
are are Grunfelds typically available for a lot less in secondary?
I think
For
they're
you?
like I think they're hovering less, if not at retail. and they're ones that you just can't. They always have you go to their website. It's like, I mean, I'll see if I'll go right now if they still have that little thing that they put up saying all of our watches are sold out. It's Grunefeld Horological Brothers. Let's pull them up right here. Sorry, for the moment, we don't take any of your orders. Like fucking bullshit, right? Like nobody wants these watches on the secondary market, and like they are either hovering retail or below retail. So it's like, why the fuck would I even go to Grunefeld? I can just buy on the secondary market for the same price on a brand new inbox watch, right? Like, so to me, it's I don't see it. You see it with Moser going down. Chopex are a good example of them, right? There was this big Chopek craze. I just come back to YouTube OC, and everybody. What really scared me was AD Never Calling had ordered one, and I was like, what kind of fucking wizardry did Chopek do for AD Never Calling to buy a fucking Chopek? But and now it's like you can buy those, for pennies on the dollar. They're not really that desirable, right? So Dr. Bob, the drama happens if I'm on the dungeon. If I'm on the mainstream, I'm talking watches, my man. That's the difference. Froyo is
Yep.
on the rise. I like me some Froyo. All right, Dr. Bob Snipers. Anybody in the chat ever sent a watch to Spencer Klein for restoration? What are his fees like? I've spoken to Spencer Klein. Dr. Bob, I used to be a pretty enthusiastic Seiko vintage collector, and Spencer Klein is one of the best in the game. Don't know about his fees. Obviously, I haven't talked to him in a long time, but his bench was always busy because I mean he's the guy who invented the term the true pogue, right? Because when Mike the Snake talks about the pogue, there's the pogue looking watches, then you got the true pogue that Spencer Klein talks about that has everything that's exact as Captain Pogue's watch. But yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I would recommend him. I've heard a lot of good things. I've never personally sent anything to him, but I know people that have, and they've had good experiences. Whole milk. Many people buy independence as a form of patronage. Yeah, I can agree with that. As long as you recognize that it's patronage, not an investment, I don't see the issue. No, absolutely, right? Like, I'm not. This is not really a conversation around. Like OC was talking about the psychology of the buyer, right? Like, yes, people who buy in certain higher end price ranges definitely are going to want something for themselves. They're going to want something that's attractive, but it's of their
But that has
personality and
that
speaks
that
to them.
has that has value to them in a way that's different than financial value. So, for example, if someone, I mean, a lot of what if you're looking at the psychology of the buyers, a lot of what these guys want who are buying independence, they want to be able to be in on the ground floor of an emerging brand, and they want to have a direct relationship with the watchmaker or the founder. So like someone like Simone Brett or Raoul Paget or whatever. So they buy those watches, yes, as a form of patronage, but also to say like I know him personally. I believe in his vision, and I'm in on the ground floor in terms of giving feedback to him on what, as a collector, where I want to see him go. And I think that provides value for them that's different than whether the watch goes up, down, or stays the same in monetary value.
I would absolutely agree with you. And I'll use a personal example, right? Like, Bernard Leader, I've done a live stream with him, with Higgins. I think you've obviously met him in Switzerland. And I mean, just a really, really cool watchmaker, down to earth guy, willing to hop on in the middle of the night. Doesn't really, I mean, he speaks English, obviously, but it's not his first language. And, he's obviously more comfortable speaking in German, but just a guy that, like, before I met him, OC, like, I was very critical of his watch. I didn't like his design. I get what he was doing from a technical perspective, but like I didn't really care. But after meeting the guy and hearing about his passion, I started warming up to it. Right, same thing with kind of like Benjamin Chi and other people. Like, so I understand that aspect of it, and you want
And Jonathan's relationship with Anderson Genève and Benjamin Chi there, another example of where he got customization and personal relationship
to.
go a long way.
And I think that if we talk about independence on the other side of it, so we talked about kind of the investment coin of it, the value retention part of it. We can flip, like, like we were just talking about the psychology of the buyer, but also what they represent, right? What these watches represent to people. What whether it's technical innovation through MP Journe, or it's absolute finishing to the nines from Dufour or Recepi, or you're just looking for something that's more traditional, British watchmaking from Roger Smith. All different avenues, all different flavors for people to buy. One of my favorites, OC. I don't know if you had a chance to hang out with Kerry Voutilainen at Watch Time. I'm sure you've met him at other places, but he was really cool at Watch Time. He was very down to earth,
Yep.
very open to let people touch his watches, handle his watches. I'm a big fan of his watches. His website is kind of shit. I'm pulling it up right now, but and I know these watches aren't for everybody. Um, But for me, I think these are really, really nice. They're nice pieces. He does art pieces. He's got, just very basic pieces. He's got sport pieces, what he calls sport pieces, like the sport, whatever the 28 sport or whatever he has. But yeah, I mean, this brand isn't for everybody. I know a lot of people don't like the lugs. These teardrop lugs are not for everybody, but I like the way he does
What's
guilloche on it.
what's the
So
price range for something like this?
you're starting, I think, around like the low hundreds. So I feel that
Ooh.
Voodoo for me is actually like, look, I mean, for me, from an independent perspective, is probably your best bang per buck. On it, if you really want to get into the high end independents, um, and more traditional, right? Maybe not an FP or an MBNF like an LM101, which is a bit
Isn't
cheaper.
he known mainly for dial design and dial
Mhm.
construction rather than movements and cases?
He is, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of guilloche on his dials. I mean, his finishing is not any slouch, I would say, on the movements, but definitely more known as a dial maker. You
Is
can,
it is it his is it his own designed movement?
I believe it is, yes, I believe they're
Okay.
all. I think because everything is handmade on this watch, right? Like, but I mean, I don't know if he does it at Bosch or he orders it or he has a contract with some, but it would be considered his own movement. It's like anybody, right? They buy it from Agenor or whatever. It's still their movement. They would call it. PLN 10 Polish Love Notes Dodger, great watch talk, guys. He partly designed the LM101 with
Okay.
MBNF, right? So yeah, and his name is written on the MBNF for the finishing, I believe, of both the movement and the dial, if I'm not mistaken. But really, really cool watchmaker. You can identify a lot of his watches by his signature teardrop lugs. But again, not a lot of people like this watch. Like a lot of people like don't like the teardrop lugs, don't like the way it looks, don't like the way it fits. I feel it's one of the best bang per bucks in the independents. But I mean, OC, it's probably a bang per buck because this may not be a very popular look because, like you said, if somebody's really looking for something that speaks to them, this may not speak to a lot of people because it is very, very traditional.
It's very
Um,
specific. It's very specific too, in the sense that you just pointed out the lug design, the look of the case is very specific. I'll put it that way. The Arabic numerals on the dial l- uh, make it appeal to fewer people than I say that if you had something less offensive. So I think yeah, he's created a watch that's a niche watch by design that's going to appeal to fewer people.
and then we move into watchmakers like Roger Smith, right? Like I know a couple of people in the community have had deposits with Roger Smith, and I've even heard like the price increases have been insane. Like somebody had I think originally when they put a deposit or they had an interest in it, the price was like around 100 and a little over 100, and then it's like skyrocketed to like 3 when they were actually ready to get the allocation and whatnot. So I don't know. Roger Smith is again probably another independent in the high end that is very does pretty well at auction. Um,
When you get to the super high end Tanzil, is there and I know there's an opportunity to talk to the watchmaker, to
mhm.
the maison directly, but do they feel the same level of uh, like the need to appeal to an individual customer in terms of either customization or feedback as maybe the mid tier independent brands, or are they like more rigid and more like, hey, this is our design. We only make 7 of these. If you like it, you like it, and if you don't, you don't, kind of thing.
I think it depends, right? I think it depends on the limitation of the manufacturer, right? They may not be able to, right? They may not be able to do it. However, everything's got a price, and it depends how much of a, how big of a collector they are and how big of a customer they are to them, right? Like, Roger Smith, may take orders simply for his Series 4 that you have here, right? And that's what you're going to get. You may have an ability to get a different customization from a few features he may have, but he may not give you full customization on it. However, if you're somebody who bought Series 1 through 4 and you want a piece unique, right? He'll definitely make you one. All these guys make piece uniques. They can definitely make them for somebody. But
Hmm.
I would say that if the question was asked to Patek Philippe, it would be a lot harder to get them to do it for you. Whereas with these guys, I think they would be more willing to do it for a customer, whether through either a relationship, like you mentioned, right? They could have a great relationship with this watchmaker and the watchmaker. Because I asked, it's funny enough, I asked that to Bernard Lederer. I said, hey, because Bernard did like the only watch and whatnot, and I was like, hey, like, could you do a piece unique, for one of us if we wanted one? And he's like, absolutely, I could. For a customer who wants one, I could absolutely do it, no problem, right? Like, so he was pretty good about it, but I don't want to speak for like a Rishepi that would probably may not do something like that, right?
Scoff. Yeah, give me that scoff at something like that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it's I would say that it's very available and it's very possible. I think that like it's all going to have different spheres of it. Philippe Dufour may not want to do it anymore and or just won't do it, right? but maybe a Recepi who's newer to the game may do it. It all kind of depends on that. Got
So
America.
real quick, the brands that you're mentioning, Roger Smith, Philippe Dufour, these are all, I mean, not just virtually unattainable. I mean, practically unattainable for 99.9% of collectors. So, what's your advice to those? I mean, if your advice is, hey, if you were going to go independence, really go for the super high end. What does that mean for the practical investor? Does that mean foregoing diving into independence until you've reached a certain point in your collecting journey?
Yeah, I think it depends on your price point, right? Like again, we're talking like OC said about like millions of dollars, like certain cases like on Dufours, and hundreds of thousands on other cases of watches, right? America 5726 299 super sticker. Thanks so much, America. Appreciate the upvote and the super chat. Um, yeah, I mean again, it's really a wide spectrum OC on that. And if I was to get like these watches are unobtainable for many reasons. Even if you had the money, you may not be able to get one. There may be so few of them produced that you just won't ever be able to get one. In other cases, you would be able to get them. And I would say that from an investment perspective, it's very difficult to. This is why I don't personally go into these, is because if I was looking at this as a pure investment, I wouldn't think they're good investments. I wouldn't think that there's enough predictability in these to ever really be why I'm buying these. And I would immediately take that off the table of why I'm buying these, and then go into like what you described of the psychology of the buyer, or like Whole Milk was describing about the connection, the relationship with the brand. I would be then recommending anybody who's seriously considering these to do what you said, right? Meet with the brands, find the one that speaks to you, because like I said, a Voutilainen speaks to me. OC might barf at a Voutilainen and might like a Recepi, right? Like and it could be similar money, and at that point it's personal taste. It's really buying the watch you want. And I think that's really the whole point of this, is if we really kind of get down to the core of it, that's what it should be about. It should not be about this other stuff. And I think if anybody who's telling you, hey, independence is the way to go for the future, like I don't know, they don't got a fucking crystal ball. So I don't know how the hell they're even saying that comment. So Shamba Basher. Earn more would be my advice, OC. What do you think?
That's right. Make more money. By the way, do you like the look of this particular Series 4?
I don't. This is not like, Roger Smiths are not really my style. Yeah, looks like a block
No,
you're
they're
at.
not.
They're not my style, but there are, like, I know a lot of people who love these, man, and I don't get it, right? Like, I try to be into traditional watches, but these guys just, and again, they understand it differently. They have a different appreciation for it. Some of it could be that they're British and they want to buy a British watch. Other people, like the history of the connection between Roger Smith and Daniels. I don't know, right? Like, there's a whole different reason for why people buy these watches. But I mean, for the average collector, for the average one of us, for the rest of us plebs, OC, that kind of have similar money to buying, precious metal Rolex, Patek Philippe's, APs, and stuff like that. Like, becomes a real minefield, man. Like, I've been struggling to like justify an LM101 over a datograph. I mean, datograph arguably, I'm gonna pull up a datograph for you guys. Arguably the considered the greatest chronograph on a wristwatch. I mean, I don't know, contentious question of whether that's true or not. But on a datograph, you're gonna get really a beautiful traditional dress watch chronograph. But then you got the MB&F LM101, really cool piece. Very funky, very contemporary. You're in the you're in the club, man. You're in the independence club, but
Barely.
but like, talk to me about the two buyers here. We'll talk about the psychology of the buyer. You got the buyer that buys. Who's the buyer that buys the datograph, and who's the buyer that buys the LM101? Same price.
Well, this is just subjectively, aesthetically, this is a very attractive looking watch. Has symmetry. Is this the new one or the old one? Like, I know there's multiple versions of the
I think
datograph.
it's the old one.
It's the new one has some kind of dial at the bottom. I'm not sure if it's a day-night indicator or a power reserve or something, some kind of circular thing at the bottom. Yeah,
it's an up-down. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, just aesthetically, this is very balanced and is very attractive looking with the two sub dials and the big date. And it is, I don't know, these are just thick watches. But I just visually and aesthetically, this is just more appealing to someone like me my instant reaction, my gut reaction is usually, the one that tells me whether I like the watch or don't. I look at it and go, okay, that's visually very pleasing to me. And to me, this is very nice looking.
So somebody goes to an event, an OC community event, and they're wearing a datograph, or they're choosing the watch to stand out, right? Both of these are in the watch box. LM101, beautiful blue dial
Well,
steel version.
I'm a hype guy, so I like Longa. You know, I'm I'm gonna like this better. I'm gonna like this.
That's interesting because I would have assumed the hype guys would have preferred the LM101 over the. I mean, they're not really like hype watches between the two. Like they're not. I mean, really highly sought after. I mean, the Dotograph is very respected and people like it because of that, and it's definitely popular because of that. But yeah, I asked that question to Captain, yesterday, and I said, "What watch if you were the first?" I'm gonna ask you that question, OC.
Mhm.
If you're the first time attendee at Watch Time New York, which I think many people that are listening, right now, may be a first time attendee to Watch Time New York. Obviously, you and I've been there before. What would you say would be the watch to wear if you wanted to stand out?
It's not about. I mean, wear something that you're not gonna see on other. You're not gonna be. It's not gonna be on other people's wrists. Wear something. Try to be unique. I might show up at Watch Time New York with the King Midas, and 75% of the people may hate it.
Ooh, you know what I was hoping you were going to come is it's not. I love the King Midas, but it would have been the Texan that you have because I think that's even more cool.
I might because you never because it's something that people almost never see in their lives, and it's all about sharing with the community. It's not about look, I have a day date. I mean, have seen day dates a gazillion times. Oh well, this one's heavier. Whoop de fucking do, right? I mean, so I think the first and foremost, bring something that I think like someone asked me the other day, which three pieces should I bring to New York, and I said this one, and this one, and one of them is one that I think very few people have seen in person. So I think try to do that. I mean, or wear your best piece. Whatever you want to do, man. Whatever floats your boat. I
Sean Babasher is asking, why do you want to stand out? Dear me, I'd wear the Timex, right? I mean, if you know me, Sean Babasher, I wear
uh,
watches that don't stand out. Patek dress watches, complications, grand complications. I'm wearing an Explorer 40 right now, so but I do have Hulks, I have Pepsis, I have all the flashy shit as well. I just don't often wear them because
I think
I
it
don't.
was like Marcelo came to New York. He didn't wear the Le Mans. I'm like, I'm wearing my dad's day just. I mean, that's cool. I get the story. But I wanted to see the Le Mans on his wrist, or the Platona or something that I associate with Marcelo.
Yeah, I mean, I think he just didn't wear it because he was worried about safety, and I
Well,
mean,
we were talking. He hopped on my stream earlier this morning, and I said we were talking about insurance because we were talking about Hodinky and Chubb, and I said, please tell me that you have your collect. I mean, he has a Platona and a Smurf and a Meteorite Pepsi. Please tell me some of these things are insured. And he said, oh, we'll talk about it offline. But you please be careful, guys. And I'm not talking about physical security, but financially protect yourself if you're going to be in a hobby where you have a $200,000, $300,000 worth of watches. Make sure that if something happens, God forbid, that it doesn't bankrupt you or it doesn't take a big chunk out of your retirement or whatever. So be prudent.
yeah, it's weird, man. Like last year, everyone was still like worried, like, oh, I don't want to wear this piece because security. I mean, I was walking around with, obviously a dress watch that most people can't identify. So I wasn't really so worried. I didn't really understand Archie's worry about bringing the world time to London. Like
It's
he's
one of
like,
it's one of the best things about walking around Manhattan with a Patek Philippe tan is that no one fucking cares. No one even
yeah,
knows what it is.
yeah, no one
It's
knows what
great.
it is. No one cares. And it's fine, right? I'm happy with that. I feel the same way kind of with the Explorer 40 because from
Yeah.
afar, it could be anything, right? It could be a Seiko, it could be whatever, right? Like, but you can still enjoy the watch on your wrist, have a quality watch, something that, has history and whatever you may like. But again, it may not fit look at me, look at me, look at me, right? Like, but there are people like Shamba Bashar's asking, like, why would you want to stand out? There's a lot of people that, they choose the watch that they pick for watch time because they want to stand out. And I'll give you an example. Like Bear Clooney, I kept fucking trolling him for bringing his Tudor. I said, Bear, you got so many great watches, and you're bringing a Tudor to an event that literally you're just going to meet probably people for the first and last time ever. Bring something nice. And look, I understand why he didn't do it because Canadian customs are, can be definitely, really, really aggressive on the return, and he just doesn't want the hassle. But you know, people do look at those watches that you're
That's right.
wearing, and
I have a guy we can smuggle it across the border. No
yeah,
problem.
yeah. People do care, right? And they want to bring their best pieces and whatnot. And but that's why it's funny to me when it's like, well, if you just got a hype collection, it's like, well,
So how many pieces are you bringing, by the way?
I'm just gonna bring my world time. That's the watch I
That's
wear
it.
when I
Just the
yeah.
world time.
So yeah, I wore it to London. You know, it's an opportunity for me. I'm trying to tick off the cities, right? Like, you know, I wore it to London. I wore it there. I'm gonna wear
Same
it to New
time
York.
zone. It's the same time
I
zone
know,
though.
but that's exactly it, right? I'm like, it's the same time zone, but I was like, at least it went to New York, right? So at least I can say I went to New York. Plus, Mr. Zoso is going to be hopefully. I've requested he wear his New York edition.
Oh
I'll take a
yeah,
little
that's
photo of
sweet.
Mr. Z and stuff like that. Yeah,
That's
it's
nice.
yeah. Look, like it's people that like yourself and other people that I talk to about Patek Philippe's that that if somebody bought something that I had some form of a help I could give to them, right? It does become special to me as well. So yeah, that's what I'll be wearing. But we can actually pivot to I don't know if you've seen this watch, OC. Um, yeah, Diego, I agree. It is one of the nicest watches. That's actually the next watch I'm looking to purchase is this watch. It's come down a bit over the year. And yeah, I think it's in the range that I'll probably buy a Gen 1. So OC, I don't know if you've seen this
Expensive.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I went to the Lager Boutique. They invited me to look at the 2024 novelties. They showed me this one, and there's a new one that's a some kind of lumen something, honey gold lumen or something. I can't remember. And one of them was over $100,000 for this model, this datograph, and then I think the lumen one was like 680 or something insane. If you could even afford to get it.
honestly, Brody, like it's a great idea, but then when you're gonna get into these really wonky fucking time zones, there's no fucking way I'm going to some of these places. But I'm gonna do my best. I do have another watch OC that I think is only either dropped today or has been spotted today. Did you have a chance to see this new 5212 that came out?
No, but wow, I like it.
Yeah, yeah, it was. So Apes actually sent this to me on WhatsApp, and it is from, so you can see this on the Instagram, piece unique underscore, as well as Horology Ancienne, I believe, is who Apes gave this link from. Patek Philippe 5212 weekly calendar. This is a limited edition, 20 pieces with what they're calling a Bordeaux dial for an Austrian AD. Now, OC, I Googled just like, 5212 and the AD name. Nothing came up. So I think that this has either just been spotted and then posted online, but I'll blow it up a bit so we can see kind of some of the differences. And again, it's not really a great picture, so you can check it out on Instagram. Um, but you've got what looks like now golden, like actual gold hands, right? Not the black and gold hands from the standard 5212 on a reddish dial with still a steel case because it's still a 5212A.
Yeah.
Um, what are your initial thoughts, OC?
Is this? I don't mean to be cynical, but do we know for sure this is something that Patek Philippe did, and this isn't something that the dealer, the Austrian dealer, had commissioned or something
Well, likely they
special?
commission. Yeah, likely they so this is not unusual for ADs. There's a lot of AD versions of certain models of Patek Philippe's, and you see them all over the place. So it's not unusual for an AD to order 20 pieces, similar to like a Tudor Harrods edition, but like obviously that's not limited. This AD commissioned probably 20 pieces for their, to commemorate their AD. It is a interesting watch, right? It was a watch, maybe a couple of years ago was very, very hot. Um, I still a watch that I love. But yeah, I do believe it's real, and I do believe it's just a
Yeah,
very
it's
small.
cool. I like the one. I like the first one, the traditional one that they came out with. It just the way the black text or the black, it looks like handwritten script on the dial works. I think is much better than this because you wouldn't be writing in white, right? Um,
Mhm.
so I just think that the white dial with the black text just works better. There are people in our community that still have this piece. I know, like Maldives still has his. Does Kesselwood still have a 5212?
No, Kesselwitz ended up upgrading to the 5320, which I think was a good.
Upgrading.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I even thought about that today. Kesselwitz, because he spent a lot. So Kesselwitz's journey with this watch was, he was looking at Laurent Ferrier. He was looking at, a whole like, whack load of pieces, Vacherons and everything. And he And I asked him the question, why did you buy the 5212 and not the Laurent Ferrier? Because arguably speaking, a Laurent Ferrier will be better finished, and a lot more limited. And you could probably get, if they have some really, really cool dials that, those ice blue dials, I really like them. Like, so why didn't you buy the Laurent Ferrier, which is arguably a better watch? And he said, you know what? There's just no community. There's nobody I can talk to about it. There's no enthusiasm about the brand. And he's just like, I value that. I value talking to people and learning about history and being able to chat about it. Like with a brand like that, he was just like, I just can't get behind it. Right. So yeah, he doesn't have it. And then when he
Yeah.
upgraded, I was like, fuck, that's a lot of money. He's got like 50 grand, and he's a young guy in a, in a grand complication or a complicated dress watch. I was like,
Right.
I mean,
And you
not many
still have
people.
yours,
I do.
okay, good.
Yep, I do. And then, yeah, it's a lot of money for. Because I asked Higgins this question this morning. I was on the phone with him, and I said, because Higgins used to sell Patek Philippe's when he worked at an AD, and it was at a time when there was no annual calendar like the one you have, and the annual calendar was brought out as kind of a stepping stone because the standard, entry level models, Calatravas essentially, and and whatnot, were about this is in the 80s, about $9,000. And then there was no step up between that and a
Perpetual
perpetual count,
calendar, yeah.
which was like 45,000 US dollars back then, right? And that's in 1996, when they brought out the 5035, the annual calendar at about a $19,000 price point, it was definitely something that would appeal to buyers, which I believe is the most usable complication for the money in that range. And like, it's just wild to see. So to think about that, and I asked Higgins, like, what kind of buyer came in for the $9,000 watch, and what kind of a buyer came in for the $45,000 watch, and he said, look, the $9,000 buyer would be like, maybe a director, or some kind of a, maybe low executive, middle manager, or high middle manager, would probably buy the Calatrava. It was a more at the time, he said it was a more affordable Patek Philippe. It gave people an entry point, so you did see people that bought those pieces. And he said the 3919 actually flew off the shelves. It was a very popular watch, very old manish right now, but very popular watch. I can show you the 3919 here, OC, just to give you some visualization of what I'm talking about. 3919 Patek Philippe, and it's funny to think that this watch was ever really a popular watch, but apparently it was in the 80s.
Yeah,
Um,
if we could, let's come back to at some point the new version of the 5212 because I'd love to hear your take on it as
yeah, yeah,
well.
absolutely, absolutely, I will. Is the 50? Oh, this is a good question. Is the 5320 really a dress watch? Yeah, I would say it is still a dress watch. It's a very sporty look. It's got obviously syringe hands. It's got Arabic numerals, fully loomed. Loom is very nice on that watch, but still got a very traditional layout, aperture style, perpetual calendar. 30 meters water resistance. Still has pushers, right? So not going to ever have really great water resistance. So yeah, I mean, I would still consider it a dress watch, a dressy, but still a sportier version of a dress watch. 3919, this was at $9,000 in the 80s. And then you had the 3940, which Diego and I are big fans of. I've been bugging Diego to buy one. 3940 perpetual calendar. This watch is like, grail of grails, you could say. And this was about $45,000. So he would say that the 3919 buyer was, somebody who had a different income bracket, like probably middle manager to low level executive. He said the perpetual calendar buyer, he's like, would be like the head of AMG division of Mercedes, kind of a thing. Really like captain of industry type would be able to afford at that time that watch at retail. So definitely a different buyer. In a range of still, like, you're talking about really really affluent people. So going
Yeah.
back to
When I,
it, and
when
that's
I
why I
was
thought.
first getting yeah, when I was first getting into the hobby, that entry level Calatrava, the really old one with the black Roman numerals, is the
Mhm.
one that was flooded on Chrono 24 and all the forums, and you could pick them up. I think I remember at the time maybe 12, 13, $14,000. These are not super. They weren't super desirable then. I don't know if they've gone up in value quite a bit over the last 4 or 5 years, but
No, no, they haven't. Again,
yeah,
it's a design that appealed probably in the 80s, I would say. Because again, it just was a different look, right? Today it's just not in vogue. It's not popular. Will it ever get popular? I don't think so. But it's even Patek Philippe themselves had, when Thierry Stern was designing, he did an interview and he was talking about how he designed the 5227, the current model Calatrava with the officer style case back, the simple Calatrava, just with a date, Dauphine hands and whatnot. When he said when he was designing that watch at Patek, he looked at this watch and said, "This is an old man's watch." And I need to make something more contemporary. And it's funny because even if we look, and that was in 2013, so that's almost like, what, 11 years ago, where, he designed this watch and felt that this was more contemporary than than the watch that we just saw on the screen, for example.
Yeah.
So
And of
again,
course, the 6119 is a modern interpretation with the double hobnail bezel, the small seconds at the bottom of the one that you previously showed, but actually doesn't look as old manish. It's still conservative, but it doesn't look quite. It's more modern and contemporary looking with the
hmm
larger case and the
hmm
yep.
I would agree. Billie Jean's PhD. What was the case diameter of the Calatrava? It was a 33 mil. Does the small size hurt in the watch collecting circles? Look, absolutely it does, right? Like it's small watches are not in vogue, and may not ever be. At least that small may not ever be in vogue, right? Like different different look, different time period, and look, nobody can say it'll never be that way. And it would be actually, what I was even thinking in my mind one time was like the joke of all jokes would be like when big watches, and I'm talking like anything that's like, let's say 37 and above, we would consider man-sized watches. If they ever went out of style and it went back to like a 33 to 37 situation, right? What would happen to all these watches that we have that are in 40, 41, 42, 44, 43? Like, what could happen at that point, right? So anything could happen, guys, and it's fun to speculate, in my opinion. OC, just hey, let's look at the flip side of it, because I'm going to ask you this question because I asked this to a watch collector this morning.
Hmm.
Let's say that we put 30 watches 30 watches in front of non-watch enthusiasts, non-watch collectors, and of them, we obviously had a mix of hype watches and we had a mix of non-hype watches, right? And you could even throw in this new First Omega in space, and you had to ask them to pick, a collection of five, right? Like, do you think that there would be more frequency of people, like, and again, the masses, not watch collectors and enthusiasts, picking five hype watches, or do you think that there would be a mix of hype and non-hype in there?
There's definitely going to be some non-hype. I think some of the things that we think are beautiful watches, like a Pepsi, for example, most people look at it and go, "That looks like a cartoon. That looks ridiculous."
hmm
So, things with crazy colored bezels and rainbow sapphires and things that are supposedly grails for watch collectors, a lot of people look at it and go, "That's just plain ugly," and a lot of those things wouldn't even make the cut. So,
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, right? I do believe that some of the hype watches are aesthetically pleasing and probably would attract the eye of, somebody who's not,
They have Rolex and a coronet on the dial. Suddenly people go, "Oh wow, the Submariner is that's a really beautiful looking watch."
yeah,
But if you take that away, and I'm not, maybe not so much.
yeah, absolutely, right? Branding and everything will definitely come into play, right? And I think, yes, definitely, if Rolex is in there, a Rolex is going to get picked no matter what. Um, KR says reversos always look a bit smaller, just saying. And Dr. Bob, no Coke, no Pepsi. I would say that, like, there's going to be, like you said, some non-hype watches, and that really where I'm going with this is in watch collecting, in the watch collecting sphere. We just constantly rotate and revolve and rotate and revolve, and just very, very insular in terms of like what is accepted and what would be desirable in that sense, right? Whereas everybody else looking, because we say, oh, well, I don't wear dress watches, right? I don't wear dress watches, because other collectors, they scoff at it. They look down on, oh, you have a dress watch, right? But I always challenge them and I say, well, then explain to me how a brand like Daniel Wellington was popular, right? We're talking about people that are not adults. We're talking about young youths, right? Teenagers, people in their 20s that are buying this brand that is a cheap watch. But I mean, there's fucking tons of cheap watches you can buy. Most of these watches were dress watches. Like, if you're telling me the dress watch, you won't buy a dress watch because you don't wear dressy clothes. Well, why the hell was that brand popular, right?
Yeah,
I,
I think dress watches can look good at lower price points, whereas some sports style watches look cheap when they're $500 or $1,000. And so I think that's the difference. You can have a Daniel Wellington that's, I don't know, $500 or $200 or whatever, and it can look nice to someone who's someone in high school, or someone who just started out getting his first job or whatever.
Yeah, I think that and I'm just looking at it purely from a design perspective, right, and an aesthetic perspective. If they weren't aesthetically pleasing to younger people, they
People
wouldn't
buy them. Yeah, they wouldn't
they
buy them.
wouldn't buy them, right? Like, so I tell watch collectors who say, "Well, I don't wear dress watches because I don't have that style." I'm like, yeah, if you ever meet me, I mean, OC's met me numerous times. I'll be wearing a dress watch, like, my Pateks, hoodie, baseball cap, whatever, right? Like, the watch, own the watch. Don't let the watch own you. And don't let it dictate, what you have to wear, right? Like, and have an individual style like that, because I think that that's what the youth do, is they just don't give a fuck, and they'll wear whatever they want to wear, and they can make it work with that. And I think that that's where we're so insular, and we just don't. We just typecast things like, oh, that's a sports watch, and you have to buy that because it's a sport. Oh, well, that's a dress watch. No, I'm staying away from that, right? Like, and I think watch collecting, honestly, OC, has just become the case and the bracelet, like, straight up. Like, I don't think it's become more than that for a lot of people these days. Case and bracelet, maybe a dial, right? Like, that's about it.
Yep.
Dodger, I'm going to pivot to another topic that I know you like, OC, in a second here. Dodger, dress watches are required for dress events. But yeah, I mean, on the flip side, right? Like, you could wear a sports watch for, I mean, look, like, a dress watch, is as versatile in non-dressy clothes as a sports watch is versatile in dressy clothes, in my opinion. Um, from a look perspective, not from, like, obviously a usage perspective of, like, having to go in the water and stuff. But, like, I mean, you can wear a dress watch with less dressy clothes just fine, and you can wear a sports watch with dressy clothes just fine. I don't think there's any rules and regulations of this, and I think everybody's got their own individual style. I want to pivot to Cubitus, OC. I know you've been talking about
Yeah.
Cubitus.
What about the 5212? Real quick, just real quick. I want to, because I looked at the white dial one. I pulled it
Mhm.
up, a picture of it, just to compare, because you can't look at this in a vacuum. I mean, you can look at it and go, oh, well, it's okay, but when you put it side by side with the white one, it's clear the white one is just so much nicer to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think from a looks perspective, this is just really weird. And steel case, red dial, gold, hands and numerals, like, a really weird combination.
Yep.
It's weird to the point of, like, it's to show that you got a unique 5212, and no other 5212 is going to look like this. That's really the only reason you're getting this. You have a tie to the AD, you want to flex. And like, I think somebody pointed out earlier, like, I think it was Patek Chris who said most of these AD versions never see the light of day on Instagram. So for us to see it
Mhm.
is a treat. I thought it was cool. I didn't know if you had seen it, and it was like, I couldn't find it
Hadn't
anywhere else.
seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Thanks
was
for
like,
sharing.
maybe it's a bit of a first here for us to have a look at. So that's my take on this one. I agree with OC. Not a fan of this one. Cubitus, OC. What do
Terrible,
you?
terrible story. Terrible choice in strap too, by the way, on that one.
Yeah, yeah. Everything's terrible. I don't think it works at all. Talking about Cubitus, OC. What do you know about Cubitus so far?
Well, we know that the invitations have been sent out. The event is in Munich on the 17th of October. And mm, I mean, I know some people, friends of friends who are, or acquaintances of acquaintances who are going to be there in person. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like that leaked dial, unless they're pulling the biggest, hoax on us that they've ever pulled. Some people say that that green Nautilus looking or
Mhm,
Nautilus inspired dial is the dial of the watch, believe it or not. And
mhm.
unless they've just doing a huge pump fake and they're putting out a little some misinformation for people to repeat. Other than that, I don't know much other than what people have told me, which I take with a grain of salt, because everyone's repeating the same rumors that it's entry level between $30,000 and $40,000, that it's choice of three dials, white, blue, and black, or whatever, and then there are three different metal options: stainless steel, two tone, and rose gold, I believe. And other than that, I don't really know that much about it, other than it's some kind of sports entry level Patek Philippe.
All right. Yeah, I think we're on the same page. I think on the intel there on Cubitus, and I'm gonna give you what I think the brand is doing with this watch. I don't really like the name of it. I think the name's weird. But I'm gonna answer
Oh,
this question.
I hope it's not the name. I hope that's just an internal name that they came up with and they actually trademarked it to kind of keep the real name under wraps. So that's what I'm really hoping, because yeah, it's not the best name.
Yeah, it's not the best name. But I'm gonna answer this for Gildan here. Tan, does Patek Philippe's white gold remain white like Rolex, or does it require maintenance to replate like rhodium? So the newer versions are gray gold. So they are gray all the way through, or white all the way through. Older versions of them, a lot of Geneva seal Pateks, like my 5035, which I had in white gold, was the old version, rhodium plated. So it depends on which one you buy. If you're buying anything modern, it will be white all the way through.
Is that the
Um,
same for white gold with Audemars Piguet? Like, for example, on the white gold Code 1159s, do you know?
I would assume they're not rhodium plated, but I don't know. I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that actually Tim also has done a tremendous amount of education on, is the difference between white gold that has rhodium plating versus a white gold alloy that is
Mhm.
made by the brand that stays that's not that's not a coating. Yeah.
Look, I would say my preference is one from a looks perspective with coating. I think the rhodium plating on it looks very, very nice compared to gray gold. But obviously, I wouldn't want that plating at all. So if I could have, the best of both worlds, I would.
Yeah. You want
But
it to
yeah,
look a certain way. Yeah.
yeah, that's just how it is. Nas is saying Cubitus sounds like something from the '90s. And Mikey Casio GTR is thinking it's a secret code name.
We'll
Real
see.
quick for Patek Chris, not much at all actually. I mostly wear the World Time or the Perpetual. Um, okay, so Cubitus. So look, I would agree that they're making something that's probably squarish that is entry level. It's not going to be a lineup that's going to. I mean, they don't really have lineups that are not like if you understand the way Patek's. That's why I pulled up their lineup here for you guys. Like they're not like other brands where they have always just like set out lineups. Like if you look at Vacheron, for example, Vacheron like they'll have dress watch like in Patek's dress watches. Like, and I'll use an example here for a perpetual calendar. You can have a perpetual calendar in a Nautilus, but it'll be in the Nautilus collection. Any other perpetual calendar that's in a dress watch will be in the grand complications section, right? It's not a lineup. It's not a collection. It's a complication. And
Well,
they
it is a hodgepodge of collections or sub brands, and then uh, categories based on complication.
correct,
This is something unique that Patek Philippe does that other
correct.
brands don't do. Yeah.
They just don't do right. And I think this is also very important to looking at how Cubitus is going to fit in the mix, right? Because when we talk about entry level, right? Like there's entry level in the Calatrava range, there's entry level in the Aquanaut range, there's entry level in the Nautilus range. Like, the price points between the Calatravas and Nautilus and Aquanauts, like at the low end, were very similar at one point. So there is entry levels all over the place. So when they say, well, it's an entry level range, I don't really buy that. I don't think that, I think I do agree that they're coming out with a new range because they've announced that, but whether it's an entry level range, I don't know. What I would venture to take out of this OC is I believe that they're going to try to replace the gondola lineup, because if you look at the gondola lineup, this is the one lineup that is stayed relatively dormant. There aren't any new men's watches here, like these are all like women's watches, right? But again, there are square design, right? Either square tonneau shaped designs, and I think that Patek is maybe going to sunset the gondola lineup and then create this new lineup to really, obviously look at whatever perspective they're seeing this new lineup to look like in that square design that you described with that dot, right? Like that's the way I see it: is gondola gone, new lineup come in, that's their new square lineup, and that's how it fits in. And that's where is it going to be super hype? I don't know, because the gondolas were not very popular.
You can read this.
Diego M. Either way, it's going to be huge and thus stupid. Patek should keep going smaller, unfortunately. And even then, Diego, right? Like, how many gondolas would you buy, right? You know how Archie keeps, like, he kept, like, I think Mr. Two bought his, like, 5111 or some bullshit. I remember when he bought that. I was like, man, what the fuck? Like, who the hell would buy that watch? Like, it's ugly. And I think I don't know, man. Like, I have a feeling Cubitus or whatever the heck this is going to be just another gondola, another square watch, and not even Archie likes them. I've been trying to pawn off like a 5040 or a 5940 perpetual counter. I'm going to show you what those look like here. On Archie, because I'm like, look, why don't you just buy like an actual grand complication? Um, stop fucking around with like just complications. You're the fucking pontiff. You should be wearing a grand complication, right? So I tried getting him to love this watch. If I can find a good picture.
Do you think it's likely to be if it's not this? Do you think it's likely to be something that's inspired by a previous collection, something that came out maybe in the 60s or 70s, or you think that's going to be fresh and dissimilar from something that they've already done before?
I think it's going to be contemporary, but like I said, if it's replacing the gondola lineup, that could be how they pitch it, right? The gondola lineup is a historic lineup. If it's a lineup named after an authorized dealer that they had a partnership with in Brazil, right? And they've had a long-standing relationship with this, AD, and it created an entire lineup. But its relevance today, OC, is just not there, right? Like Diego is not going to his AD saying, "I want a fucking gondola." right? He's going there saying, I want an Aquanaut, or I want a Nautilus, or I even want a Calatrava, right? Like, so I think that like they're going to potentially scrap the gondola line, tie the history to say, hey, look, we were inspiring these watches from square watches that we made in this historic line. However, we're making something fresh and new for the young collector that wants to buy them, and that's how I see it. Is that's because that's what Patek's been doing. They've been doing contemporary watches with traditional designs, I guess.
That wouldn't be my recommendation to them. If my recommendation would be to not tie the new watch around a story about taking over from another collection. I think if they're going to sunset this watch, they sunset it at a different time and quietly, and have it to have the story completely unaffiliated with the launch of the new watch. I just don't think it's. I don't think you want to. I mean, like one of the things that mars the 1908 is the discontinuation of the Cellini, right? And people say, "Oh, well, it's just the Cellini with a different name." I mean, it's the same old boring dress watch. So I think that's how I would approach it.
I agree with you. I think that, well, if they had both lineups at the same time, right? Let's say the lineup's called Cubitus and they have a gondola lineup, right? Then you got two square lineups, right? And Patek in and of itself is not, like you said, very conventional in how they separate lineups. So I would think it'd be a bit redundant in the lineup if they had both. So I can't
Yeah.
really see a square watch and a gondola being there at the same time.
When we were at Tiffany and Co. just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to the SA there. He described the new watch as basically a Nautilus. I mean, he said the dial that we've seen is the dial, and it's going to be like a Nautilus. He described it as a Nautilus extension, basically, in terms of the look. Maybe a different case shape, but they're definitely, I think. Well, we'll see when the watch comes out, but I think they're going to appeal to the same kind of buyer that is interested in an Aquanaut or a Nautilus, not a gondola or
Well, that's
or
exactly,
one of
I
these.
think I think that's exactly the point they're trying to do, is they're trying to take the essence of the Nautilus, right? Make it look somewhat similar dial. I've seen the leak that you showed. Um, similar-ish dial, somewhat similar. But what they're forgetting is, if it's a square watch like this, let's assume that we put that dial on this watch somewhat, somewhat fit. Um, you lose the essence of what the Nautilus is, right? Like that actual case design, the bracelet, that's the Gerald Genta DNA, and that's what people why people always wanted that watch. So I just think that yeah, they would still try to do it because they think that, like, because understand why, in my opinion, like if you look at VC and you look at AP, their latest two lineups have been circular watches, right? VC's latest lineup was the 56, an arguably circular watch. And then AP's newest lineup was the Code 1159, arguably a circular watch, right? So both of them didn't do well. Um, well, I mean, I know there's a lot of Code 1159 fans there. I don't think that line's a success in my opinion. So I can understand why Patek is saying, well, we're not going to do a circular watch because we have fuck tons of circular watches. We don't
Right.
really have a square watch. Let's do a square watch, but make it somewhat look like the Nautilus and the Aquanaut, and make it somewhat be a sporty-ish watch. I don't think this is going to be a sports watch, to be honest with you. I think this is going to be a dress watch on a fucking strap.
Wow, that is a bold prediction,
Yeah.
Tan. It really is, because I don't think anybody has said that it's not going to be. I don't think I've heard anybody say that it's likely to be a dress watch.
It's hard to say, like, if you saw this on a sport bracelet, right? Like, I mean, it could, and it'd be funky looking, right? But what then, let's assume it's not. Let's assume it's on a bracelet. You put a bracelet on this, we put the Nautilus dial on this. Like, it's different, right? And I can give them
Yeah.
that. But is it desirable? Does it look nice? I don't know, right? And I think it'll fall short. I think that if they go that way, and it just, I think that they're missing the point, right? Like, I think that they need to. Paddock is, what people love and hate about them is, like, they love how traditional they are and they hate how traditional they are. Like when they try to do anything more contemporary, like the new AutoZone, like everybody hates it. People don't
Yeah.
love it. They just fucking criticize it, even though the brand is trying to. And then otherwise, if you don't do that, it's
Yeah.
too fucking old manish.
The thing with the 6007 is that a dial can be modified. A dial can be modified the next year. Let's say this dial, you don't love it or whatever. They can easily change that in a year. You're going to have a different model. The case can remain the same, movement the same. You just change the straps and you change the dial and redesign the dial a little bit. And you, like what AP did with the Code 1159, when the first couple years it came out, it was on leather. It had those weird font for the dial, and now it's 4, 5 years later, and they have batons. They moved the date to the 3 o'clock position. Now they have these mesh rubber straps, and it looks like a totally different watch.
Yeah, I think it's just very hard for them to do something contemporary. And I think they did a really good job because everyone says, "Oh, well, this looks like X, right? It looks like this type of watch or that type of watch or whatever, right?" And I totally get that. But I think they did a really good job. Looking at contemporary, on this piece on the 5226. I think this is a really nice looking Patek Philippe. Although people will say, "Oh, it reminds me of a Hamilton or it reminds me of X," right? Like
Yep, sure does.
it's
Yep.
not like those brands like have the ownership of like field watches, right? Like field watches are gonna have a certain design look to them, but I think they did a really good job on this one. On the AutoZone, I mean, I'm not really a fan of it. I've tried one on; they're nice. Wouldn't be what I would buy personally. But people, they love and hate it, right? They're like, well, fuck, like, I don't like that. But, then you try, okay, well, do you want something more traditional? Because they're like, well, I want something more Patek Philippe. And then they hate this.
Yeah, it's too
It's like,
conservative. It looks like an old man's watch. Blah blah blah. My brother, by the way, when he went into Patek Philippe to buy, because he had bought an LUC dress watch that looks very similar to this one, but has a small subdial at the bottom. And when I was getting into watches, he's like, "Oh, like my brother's getting into watches. Maybe I should look at Patek Philippe because as my one watch." And he ended up getting a 5227 black dial, and he paid full boat for it. And he's like, "That's just the way I roll, man." It's like the watch they offered it to me, I liked it, and I bought it. So
that's actually a really good choice. And I'll tell you why. Back in the day, like when Archie had the 5107, the white gold, sorry, the platinums. So back in the day, Patek Philippe black dials were, generally reserved for like platinum watches. So having a black dial in the white gold is actually pretty cool. It to the brand, it's considered the desirable dial in that sense. And I
nice.
think it's a great choice. I was
Yeah,
gonna
I
say, Dr.
think.
Bob's. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was well, coming up with a new collection is so hard, so difficult. They've been working on this for 6 years, from by all accounts, based on what we've heard. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, they have to be authentic to themselves and not follow trends. At the same time, they want to make something that's new and contemporary and modern. So they don't have an easy job ahead of them. If they're being influenced by Richard Mille and kind of tonneau shaped cases, or I don't know what they're going to be influenced by, but they have, hopefully they look inward with a little bit of outward, and they're true to themselves, and it's something that aesthetically is very pleasing, and it hits on all cylinders. And I wish them all the luck, because it's not an easy job at all to come out with a new collection.
And it's interesting that you say, 6 years in the making, right? Like the watch game was a lot different
A
six
lot
years
different.
ago. Like I mean, we're talking about a time when, like, I mean, I bought my Nautilus maybe 8 years ago, 2016. It still sold over retail, but we're talking about retail was like 24K, and like David SW was
Yeah.
selling it for like 25.5, right? Like it wasn't like triple, quadruple over retail. Um,
If they
so
go back to their past, they find something that's aesthetically pleasing but was perhaps fell out of favor. They modernize it. It looks great. It'll be a hit. Look at the Cartier Tortue, the new mono pusher. When that came out, everybody looked at it and goes, "Wow, that's beautiful." It doesn't matter if it's a not a traditional round case or not a whatever case. That it still has all the essence of a Cartier. It reaches back into their lineage and pulls something out that was from the past and looks fantastic. I can't find any faults with that watch. So I think if Patek Philippe does the same thing, it'll be a hit. If it's quirky and odd and takes a little bit of time for you to warm up to, it still might be a hit. But it might be one of those things like the Code 1159 that they have to tweak and let it sink in, and we'll see how it goes.
yeah, I would say that it has to be so not Patek Philippe. Like I agree with the sentiment of like where they can find success is from history. But if you look at their catalog, it's such a sea of circular watches. It's like going to Vacheron's fucking website. And if you just filter all watches and you scroll down, like until you get to the overseas section, it's all the same, basically. And I think that like for Patek to be differentiated, it has to have a different design. Like a square, the square makes sense. They've just historically not done well with square watches, I would say. And that's
Is it
where
like
it,
could
Mhm.
could it be more of this shape, more of like a tonneau shape with a square dial?
I think that that's probably where it's going to be or it's going to land. But from that, let's assume that that dial you showed is real, right? It will have to be more on the because like look, this is the 5940. I'm going to show you the version before this. which had a completely kind of different, more tonneau shaped case, and that was the 3940. Sorry, the 5040. Let me pull up a 5040 here. So
While
the
you're pulling that
5040.
up, everybody upvote the live stream, guys. There's nearly 60 people watching. I'll jump off in a little bit, give somebody
Yeah,
else a
no
chance
problem.
to jump on
No problem.
and share the panel with. So
So you can see the 5040. So again, this is a perpetual calendar, Breguet hands, Breguet numerals. Like this is a special watch. Like Patek Philippe doesn't often put Breguet hands with Breguet numerals on a piece unless it's special. Um, it's still like this is in annual calendar price points. It is a bit of a smaller watch. You can see on the wrist, it's obviously small in this guy. But again, tonneau shaped case. It's not exactly square. Definitely has a different look, OC, but, okay, let's assume that this is what the watch looks like and maybe want a bracelet, right? Like, with that dial that you described, is that visually appealing to you? Is that something that would drive you to be like, "Fuck, I gotta buy this?" I mean, I don't know. For me, it would be a clear no.
yeah, it's a no. I mean, the case is a little too rounded and soft for me. I think if you have that shape dial, but you do it with a sharp, aggressive, muscular kind of case, then I think there's a chance. But not with Breguet numerals and not with all these complications at the outset. I think it needs to be more sharp and focused at launch.
So Buckley coming in hot take, exposing OC. Oh, I get it. OC is pretending
I
like,
don't
no,
know
it's
it.
good though. It's good though, right? Like it's still good to play the game and the speculation and whatnot. That's what's fun about it, right, Buckley? Like, for
No,
me,
I still don't know if it's going to be a square case or a tonneau shaped case or anything. I have no idea.
square or tonneau though, right? Like, and if you're saying it's a sport watch, then let's axe the bracelet. Let's axe the leather strap. Then you're putting it on a bracelet or rubber, right? Or rubber.
I think
Uh,
it's 100%. It's going to be there's stainless steel, there's two tone, and there's a rose gold option. I think that's what we've heard consistently. So I don't think unless they're again totally duping us, that's what everybody's heard.
so throw on rubber, throw on a bracelet, throw on that dial. Like, Buckley, I don't see this as a recipe for success. I mean, it's different. I'll give them that. It's different, but is this going to drive you to want to buy one? I don't know, right? Like,
I think one of the main factors is going to be how well does the case and bracelet work together? Is it a unified piece or is it something that looks disjointed? Because I think where they fall flat is like, for example, on the Aquanaut, you put that on the steel bracelet and it's like, well, ugh, it just doesn't look the same. It looks like a bracelet and a case that weren't made for each other. I think having a watch that's completely unified and integrated is key to the success of this model.
what scares me, OC, is like the fact that you're actually acknowledging that it'll probably be on a bracelet or a sports watch. And what I'll tell you about what I don't like about that statement is I've never really met too many Patek Philippe's on a bracelet that I actually liked. And I'm gonna show
It's
you some.
scary. It's scary.
I'm
I
gonna
know.
show you. I'm gonna show you some dogs, right?
And by
Like,
the way, and by the way, just because it's on a steel or metal or precious metal bracelet, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a sports watch. I maybe we shouldn't even be saying that.
yeah, you got the 5960, the one that Brian used to have, but Brian had the one on the strap. You can get that one in the steel on the white dial or the black dial of the bracelet. That one actually looked nice. People would kind of consider that a sportier watch. This is the Patek Philippe Sculpture. This watch was made for the Russian market. It ended up opening up to the rest of Europe. Not a popular model. One of their iterations on a bracelet, guys, that I think could be a fucking train wreck when Cubitus comes out, could look something like this. And Lolex says that this screams Buckley all day long. Um, I don't know, man. Look, I think Buckley could pull this off. I think over Lolex, I think Buckley. I think this would look weird on Lolex. I think Buckley could pull this one off. This is one of them. I'll show you guys the 5960 on a steel bracelet. Beautiful watch. Again, it's considered a dress watch, but like OC said, right? It's may not be necessarily just because it's on a bracelet doesn't mean it's doesn't mean that it's a sports watch, right? And this one,
At least this 5091, at least the watch is integrated in the sense that the case and the bracelet are integrated. Uh, there are a lot of other Patek Philippe's where it looks completely disjointed.
Patek Chris, 5167, Aquanaut 5905 are bracelet failures. Nautilus and new Ellipse bracelet are nice. Yeah, look, the Ellipse is one that not a lot of people love. I actually do like the Ellipse. Would not be a first Patek Philippe I'd ever recommend to anybody, but if you are a Patek collector, I think you should have one. It's cool.
Maybe Patek Chris is talking about that new hand assembled
He is.
link bracelet, which is very,
He
very
is.
nice. Yeah.
He is. Yeah, I mean, look, like they make some good bracelets. Like this is a nice bracelet watch, Patek Philippe. Most of them are terrible. You want to okay, so okay. So I think people like the hideous Patek bracelet. So let me pull up the Patek Neptune. I think it's the 5085. Let me pull that up because I think that is one that a lot of people really hated. And yeah, here we go.
If it
Monochrome
if it
lens.
if it's on a steel bracelet or a precious metal bracelet, is that a no? Is that a deal breaker for you, Tan?
It's not a deal breaker, right? But if it looks like fucking this, like, I mean, I mean, what do you want me to say? Like, they have not. It's like you telling me, "Hey, Tan, like, just give it a chance, give it a chance." And I'm like, man, this brand has burned me so many times with the bracelet. Like, I can't.
Uh,
It's
a
gonna
lot
be
of it
good.
has to do a lot of it has to do with the high polish sometimes. I think you can do brushed and it helps a lot. It doesn't help all the way, but it helps a lot to not have it be high polished. Case, bezel, bracelet.
Yeah, Mikey Casio of all the Paddock show tonight. This was the worst. Yeah, man. Like, it's. But this is what I'm
I'll
saying
vote
is,
for the worst Patek Philippe's ever.
yeah, and Billie Jean's looks like a Breitling bracelet, right? Like, it's if you're telling me that new model is gonna have a bracelet and it's potentially tonneau shaped or square, like, man, it's I don't know what to say, man. Like, that could be really, really tough for me, tough pill to swallow for, Patek collectors. But look, there's gonna be the guys that are gonna buy it anyways because it's part of the brand. But um, let's see what Buckley says. Nautilus
Luckily,
hybrid blue.
spilling the beans.
All
Yeah,
right, so not Nautilus hybrid blue green dial. I mean, what does that even mean? Nautilus hybrid, right? I mean, Nautilus is like it's
I
got
think
a
they
certain.
mean not Nautilus inspired dial. We've seen the dial and it looks like that. Yeah.
Okay, so Nautilus inspired blue green dial, 3 straps, quick release. Okay, that's cool. Maybe chronograph complication makes sense. 3 metals. This is what we were told. 3 separate Patek employees confirmed. OC is being humble, but I don't care. Well, I appreciate the help, Buckley. Yeah, I mean the chronograph complication makes sense. The 3 metals makes sense. Um, three
It
three
makes
strap.
sense for Patek Philippe to start off with three hander and then add complications over time to make the line interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you could start with a chronograph. That's a pretty simple complication for that. Well, I mean, it's a desirable complication, I would say, for a sports watch, and people would want that. I mean, right off the bat, because Patek's actually changed a lot of the way they do things. And I'll give you an example, like dials, right? Like they often wouldn't come out with a blue dial first. A blue dial would often come out later on in a release. Like for example, like the perpetual calendar chronograph, I think came out originally in like a silver dial, like a very plain looking dial, right? And now you see them with like green dial, sunburst green dials, and like salmon dials and blue dials and stuff like that. But you have other iterations of them, like the 5327 perpetual calendar that came out with a blue dial, and other pieces that have now coming out with like that really banger dial first. Look at the inline perpetual calendar, right? OC, like that could have came out in a
Hmm.
more traditional opaline, bland type of Patek Philippe way of doing it. But now they're starting to do the more contemporary dials first. So this does make sense for them to use a complication that is pretty popular, I would say. The 3 strap quick release makes sense because of like you're competing against Vacheron overseas, right? Like that watch, I think is just amazing value for money.
Yeah. Giving people more versatility and also things like micro adjustment, just modernizing the wearability. Another thing I would say is the only challenge with having complication out the gate is that it increases uh, the f- the visible dimensions on the watch on the wrist, and it might look too big for some people. Having It's one thing to have a square dial and a large case, but then you're adding pushers as well, and it just visually makes the watch look very, very big.
Buckley says, when asked who would get offered the Aquanaut or Nautilus list to get this, answer the clients who will receive allocations already have those shitters. Have fun, get in line, bitch. Literally, yeah. I mean, look, it's a new watch. They're gonna hype it up. Like, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's Patek Philippe. It's one of the
Buckley,
best.
jump on,
Yeah, hop
take
on
my
the
place.
the
Yeah.
link is there. It's all good. Like, I'm gonna be ending in like 15 minutes anyway, so you're all. If you got a dip OC, it's all good.
No.
Um,
I'll say if it's 15 minutes, I'll stay.
Yeah, it's like 15 minutes, and then I gotta go. But yeah, like I would say Buckley that I mean that makes sense. It's a hype brand. It's a brand that is very hard to get into right now. So yeah, if you're looking for this, and unless it's an absolute dog, just like Lolex is saying, Patek is constantly shits the bed on, when it comes to bracelets. And Patek has so many forgotten bracelets over the years, from the beads of rice bracelets on the 530 chronographs to something like a 3466 on a bracelet. The one looks like an old Speedmaster bracelet. Yeah, like there's tons of atrocities when it comes to bracelets, that when OC tells me it's likely a bracelet watch, or maybe on a bracelet, I'm like, fuck, like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Um, how come the narc doesn't jump on and cuss us out every 50? Narc's probably sleeping right now. That's why I started the show pretty early, in like 2 o'clock, Eastern time. So it was just more of a, people in the UK, people in Europe. It was around 7, 8 o'clock. I figured, hey, why don't we talk some watches? I wanted to give my hot take on the first Omega in space, because there's just a little bit too much simping going around YouTube, and I was like, look,
And
I
you
got to
did,
tell people.
and yeah, and the videos keep coming out. I saw ID Guy came out with his video today. Britt Pierce came out with her video today. So
I'm gonna
yeah,
give
all the
I'm
YouTubers
gonna
are jumping on the
I'm gonna
bandwagon.
give ID Guy a pass here, because ID Guy approaches his, and by the way, ID Guy's a good friend of mine. Really like him, like his channel. He's, you know been around forever. He's an Archieverse fan. He's been watching Archie forever as well. He approaches watches from a design, industrial design perspective, a design perspective, and I do feel that this watch is a very good looking watch. The first Omega in space. I really do. I don't think that this is a design failure by any means, and I know that he feels it's a very nice watch. And I would agree with him. If you're looking at a design perspective, it's not a bad piece. But yeah, I don't know. OC, like, you don't think this is a bad looking watch? You think it's an all right looking watch?
No, it's all right looking watch. I mean, I don't like the stainless steel. There's a steel hand on the left hand side, then the two, the one at the 3 and the 6 are white, and the chronograph hand's white. I don't like that. Me personally, I like them to be a little all uniform. I get it. Why? I understand why they're white. I'm not stupid. Um, but yeah, like little things like that irk me. Like I don't want that. I don't want the left dial to be with a steel hand. I know why it's there, but I don't like it. I don't love it.
Ja is asking, liking the paddock talk, but wondering if I can ask. Yeah, sure. Ask a car question. Why not, man? Hopefully, I'll be able to answer it for you. And KR is saying ID guy is dope. Yeah, man. ID guy's content's always been good. Like, he just approaches it in such a unique way that, like, you know, there's so many YouTubers out there that just regurgitate and regurgitate and regurgitate. Like, he approaches it in a different way. I really like the way he does stuff. We are putting a moratorium. You know what? Faux patina. It's funny because this watch is the first one I've seen in a while that's really garnered a lot of rage about faux patina. To the point where I thought that people were so desensitized by it now. Because I mean, everybody loved the No Time to Die, right? The No Time to Die had faux patina as well, right? But you don't really hear too many people complaining about it. Here, it's like in the past 24 hours, I've had multiple people say, "Wow, fuck the faux patina," right? Like, I really don't understand, OC, where the threshold of, like, when it's acceptable and when it's not acceptable is, because there doesn't seem
People
to be
are
any rhyme or reason about it.
people are fickle. I mean, they didn't love it on the original Black Bay 58 that came out, but then when other people do it, it looks great. Just to your point. You know?
Yeah, like Dr. Bob says, I like faux patina if it looks good. Um, maybe people, look, the whole point of this, because somebody asked, like, is the dial, like, why is it blue gray? Is it like heritage or something like that? I'm like, look at the rest of the watch. They're trying to make it look like it's an aged vintage watch that you can wear as a modern piece. And I would say, OC, for me, having been a vintage Rolex collector, and I know you have some vintage Rolex as well. Um, I always felt the Black Bay 54 was really a perfect modern watch that, like, had the real vintage vibe. That really felt like a vintage watch. It's thin, it's slim, it's small, it's got all the vintage accents to it, but it's totally usable as an everyday watch. You can bang it around, and it doesn't have crown guards, but it's still got crazy water depth resistance. Like, you know, I think that that's the nostalgia they're looking for in this, but I don't think it's going to evoke it from everybody. I think that 54 really did it for me. A lot of people don't like it, but for me, that's the one that does it.
And is that something you wear or you don't wear?
I actually sold it. I bought,
Yep. See, there you go.
yeah. I bought. Well, look, I always say there's never
Case
been.
closed.
Yeah, there's never been a tutor I met. There's never been a tutor I met that I didn't flick. But I would say, from an experience perspective, if you are looking for a modern watch that actually feels like a real vintage watch, The Tudor Black Bay 54 is where it's at. Lolex, you tried this watch on. He's saying there's so much dick riding when it comes to the new speed. Yeah, man. I saw your Instagram post, and I thought it looked really good on your wrist. It was a little, because I mean, this is a 39, right? And it's not big on your wrist, but it could appear a little bit. Like, it's just, I don't know, man. But I think he either tried it out or I saw it on his Instagram and he posted it up, a video of it. And yeah, Lolex, I was seeing it like for the past 24 hours, just everybody just being like, oh, this new Omega, first Omega in space. I'm like, why the fuck do you even care about a first Omega in space? Like, it's never been a desirable model. Like, I don't.
What do you think? What do you think of the fact that it's relatively attainable at the outset, at launch? You think? I mean, it's from the boutique, so they're maximizing. It's limited distribution in that regard, but the fact that it's available.
I mean, it's like every other one, basically. Like, I mean, what's not available, right? Snoopy and the 321.
Well, the white dial one is a little bit more difficult to get, right?
For now, right? Like, it's just how it was with the original 3861s when it first came out. There wasn't a lot of them floating around because post-COVID production and or COVID production and whatnot. But for now, it's a white dial. It's like the Tudor. When the Tudors have like certain hype watches, for a certain period, like the GMT when it came out was hyped for a little bit and then just dies down. Like, that's what I see with Omega. I don't see it ever.
Well, Dear Artifact raised a good point. He's like, listen, if they're going down the road of through their entire lineup of historical releases and coming out with modern reinventions of classic pieces from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, or what, then they're on the right track. If they keep doing this one a year, they have an endless catalog of references to which that they can turn to pull new modern for the collector. And if they sell 10, 15, 20,000 of them, from a financial perspective, it's a no-brainer for them to do. And it appeases and satisfies collectors who are looking for something new every year, every 2 years. That's a Speedmaster. And people who have tens, dozens of Speedmasters who are avid collectors, that's not me, but there are others that do that.
What I find most fascinating about that is the fact that the brands are, because what they're doing is they're making just modern vintage watches, right? And it's really going from, and if you see the way watch collecting has evolved over the past decade, especially today with the Hodinkee buyout and everything else. I mean, Hodinkee was really responsible, as a big part of like, getting the vintage craze going with young watch collectors. That was their target realistically was, younger, more contemporary, buyers and whatnot. And then, over time, and you see a lot of people like that are new to collecting that just don't want to buy vintage, right? They're like, they're getting told by other collectors, hey man, it's a minefield, or hey man, you can't use it every day, or hey man, like they want that cool look that's popular right now because of the media, but they want something modern, right? Everybody wants a modern watch. So it's just interesting how the brands picked up on that and then just make stuff like this.
Yeah, but when you say modern, you have to define it, because modern isn't just a word. It's there's actual features that go into making a modern watch, like a bracelet that feels sturdy and is constructed and built well. Things like micro adjustment in the clasp.
Yeah, exactly.
A reliable movement.
Modern
something.
Yeah.
A modern feel. Yeah.
Modern feel, modern technology, premium. Like you mentioned, premium feel, right? Because the brand Omega today is far different than the brand Omega, from the 50s, right? Like, maybe from that perspective. So you want to, like you said, you want to have something that the modern buyer is looking for. And what is fascinating to me is just that whole point, because it's like we're looking at vintage watches, but I think it's missing the essence of like why I don't think these are going to succeed in the long run is when you buy a vintage watch, the soul of that watch over 50 years, 60 years, 70 years is in that watch, and it's just completely different than anything you can see today. And when you buy a vintage watch, like, I mean, Diego, you want a C3, I think he's still listening. I mean, you own a C3 Corvette, and that C3 Corvette is going to smell and drive and sound completely different than a modern C8 Corvette. And you buy it for that purpose. And so when you take that essence away, OC, and I get it, right? Like, people hate the pre-ceramic Rolexes because of the tinny, shitty clasp, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, that's the charm of it. That's why you buy vintage. And I think that's what Hodinkee always kind of talks about is the charm of vintage, right? You don't buy a vintage sports car or vintage watch for it to feel and look and smell modern, right?
But then just like someone, there are people who want not a 1967 Mustang, but there are other people who want a 2024 Mustang that has vintage cues, or it evokes the emotion or the design, or harkens back to similar design cues that the Mustangs had in the 60s and 70s. So they're two different markets. They're not, you don't have to do one and not the other. You can appeal to both. I mean, obviously, you can't make vintage watches. Your Omega, you can't sell vintage watches at scale. You have to sell new watches. So what do? You go back into the catalog and you do vintage inspired.
And the reason I say that is because I think that it's a fad, OC, is what I really think it is. I think that Hodinkee has, in the media, really influenced a lot of people to want to look for that aesthetic, right? And they basically they weren't looking to do that. They were looking to get people to buy vintage watches. And a lot of us, on the panel, in the chat, can identify that this is a really good looking watch, right? It's not necessarily a very modern contemporary looking watch, but it is a very, very good looking watch of something that is vintage inspired. And I think that with Hodinkee potentially even going away, OC, with the news today, I think over time people are just not going to give a fuck, and they're going to want something that's just looking different. I think that's what we're craving for in the new Patek release, is something that's a real banger, that's like different, that's new, but that's fucking sexy. Right? That's what really I think watch collecting needs. It doesn't need a bunch of just fucking reissues. And I just think it's going to tap out after a while, right? It's like me and the dungeon reruns, guys. Like, I'm never going to hold 50 viewers for
How many
forever on
videos do you have
that.
queued up? I don't know. I think you can. I mean, you have an endless catalog, an endless library of content there. But I think the thing is, what Hodinkee and other people who espouse vintage, Wind Vintage, and these other guys, what they may have inadvertently done is get people attracted not to vintage watches, but to the aesthetic of vintage. And
Absolutely.
they've gotten people to think, oh well, this old Hoyer Carrera looks good, or this old 1975 Daytona looks good, but haven't gotten them to the threshold of, that's a vintage watch I want to buy. I like that aesthetic, and if there's a modern watch that captures that essence, and you see that with Hamilton, you see that with Hoyer, you see that with all kinds of brands going back and pulling out retro designs and having them be successful, relatively successful.
Yeah, I think it's more of just a construct of today, right? Like, and the only other watches I could remember, like when I started collecting or when I was pretty early in collecting, that did this kind of stuff, or brands that were doing stuff like this, were mostly Tudor. Um, it was them. That's why the Black Bay was such a hit. It's like, well, Tudor now is back in the United States. It was gone from the US for a long time. Watch collecting was very, it was like getting to a point where it was very like prominent, in terms of it being an actual business and a big market and whatnot. And then, collectors were asking for it, and then they did it. But it wasn't like, it was cool. It was a novelty, I would say, for a collector to have something like that. It felt like a novelty, but was it something I absolutely had to have OC? And I think this is where I think the real fatal flaw in this is. So if your artifact says that, hey, we're going to produce these, in the next couple of years, absolutely. I think in the short term, yeah, it's popular. It'd be there. I think in the long term, I would disagree. I think that, like, they're not always just going to go back to those 50s, or 60s inspired watches. I think that the buyers are gonna ask for something a bit newer, and just not the old dribble, right?
Fair enough.
But that's how it is, guys. The market. I mean, these Swiss fucking brands don't listen to us. They don't give a fuck what we think. Some of them do, right? It's the smaller guys do. The enthusiast brands do. I think Rolex, Patek. I mean, unless you got big bucks, don't really care. To that extent, they're going to do what they do. I mean, the Stearns have a certain vision, of how they want their brand to go, and they're going to lean in on that, right? Until they get sold and they go to somebody else. Who knows how that's going to transfer over? But for me, that's the way I see it. OC is just, I think that there's a lot of fads. I think people need to be very careful of what they hear and read online. Obviously, there's certain companies that are out there that are specifically there to, either promote, or, like you said when we had the talk earlier about, having, because I don't know if you saw the show the other day, OC, with Mark Hackman on with Archie, but so he used to work at Hodinkee, and
Mhm.
Archie asked him. He said, "Well, like, why are there never any articles that are written that are like, really just ripping into the wall, or not even ripping, but like being a little critical?" And, Mark said, look, like, what we would do in that same discussion of how you said, you're authentic, but you're biased. He was like, well, we would potentially just pass those over to people that like the brand. Right. So they were giving their authentic opinion, but they were biased. Right. And therefore
Right.
you're getting, like what you said in the Hodinky side, that opinion, which may not ever be a negative or have a negative or any form of a negative view of the watch, right? Or too
Yeah.
critical view of
I
the watch.
mean, that dynamic is not uncommon, whether you're reviewing watches or reviewing cars from automakers, right? There's a symbiotic relationship between uh, the publishing end, the advertising revenue that comes from those brands, and then the editorial side that is uh, the desires for the editorial side to treat those brands favorably and to be recognize where they're you know where they're the goose that lays the golden egg. Don't upset those guys.
Dodger, big watches, 41 mils and above are a fad and will die out. Ooh, this is a hard one, man. Um, eh, Look, everyone said, well, why don't we wear 33 mil watches anymore? And everyone's like, well, we're bigger people now, right? So I'm like, well, what happens in another 60 years? Like, are we wearing fucking like 50 millimeter watches? Like, what do you mean? Like, we're bigger people? Like, are we going to keep getting bigger? Are we going to get smaller? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Um, but look, Dodger, I mean, there was a time in even more recent times where a 36 mil Datejust was absolutely fine for a man to wear. And there's a lot of people that wear them and they look good and they're fine. Not everybody likes that. People prefer a bigger watch for multiple reasons, right? I mean, legibility is one of those reasons. People like a bigger watch. So it's not always about like, well, it's what's hyped or value retention and whatnot.
Hmm.
Brody's saying this is a nice watch, regardless of its authenticity to history. I have never cared about the Speedy's connection to NASA. So this is a good point from a buyer perspective of somebody who's just looking for a nice looking watch. And I think Brody, there's going to be a lot of people, and that's why I told OC I feel that they're going to sell a lot of these because it is a very nice looking watch. I think if you walked into the authorized dealer and you may not have researched or cared, like you said, about the connection to NASA, you won't pick the Moon watch over this at the same price point. You're going to pick the better looking watch, right? So I do feel that
I think.
that's.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
I'm
I
done.
was going to say we talked about this a lot yesterday, and my feeling is that because it's so visually attractive, it just when you look at it, it's a very nice looking watch. I think Omega Sales Associates should actually lead with the story and about where this watch came from and Wally Schirra, and it was the first watch worn in space. And Omega has this rich history of being the chosen timekeeper of people who do space travel and all that stuff. I think that's the part that maybe people don't realize, and I would lead with that because when this watch is in their hand or sitting on the tray, the people are gonna they're going to know it's a nice looking watch. And I think start off with that and then say, oh, and that's where this watch came from. I think it's going to get people emotionally hooked in a way that just looking at and feeling the watch doesn't. And I think that's Omega's opportunity here with the new buyers or new collectors.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that like I even find the story even cooler that like private, these are privately owned watches that those astronauts bought themselves and took up into space, right? Like
Yeah.
at a time when there was like probably no regulation, it's the Wild West. These guys are like, jet fighter pilots that are, part of the space program. Like it's such a cool, like
It's a good story. Yeah.
yeah, like I don't know, like it's not everybody's. I'm into sci-fi, guys. Just a bit of personal information. I like sci-fi. I like '60s Star Trek. Gives me that kind of a vibe, where like that Star Trek, if you really like the show, were like really kind of pioneers in space exploration. It was all the Wild West. You see Captain Kirk, doing a bunch of shit that Captain Picard probably wouldn't do. So pretty cool. Want to say hi to Sucklehorn in the chat, who's up very early here. I said there are going to be some Australians joining us a little
There
bit
we go.
later, and I appreciate. Patek Chris is in New Zealand. Nice to see him as well. So very, very international chat here, OC. OC, I'm going to go for another 13 minutes all the way
I'm going to
from
jump
New York.
off, but thanks for having me on, and
Yeah,
have a
thanks
great
for hopping on, man.
afternoon, and yeah, have a good day, everybody in the chat. Peace out.
Peace out, man.
All
Appreciate
right,
the
see ya.
original OC guys joining me for 2 hours of watch talk, where I was giving my hot take on the first Omega in space. So OCs have brought up a lot of good points. I think from the buyer's perspective, obviously Brody's point was excellent around not really needing the connection to NASA, right? Like for somebody who doesn't care, because I told OC, I said, look, what I feel, where this watch is going to be a problem for Omega is they put it right smack in the price point of the Moon watch. Canadian dollars. The Hesalite Moon watch is like 9,500 Canadian dollars. This watch is 10,700, and then the white dial is 11,000. Right, so you're right in the middle of like sapphire sandwich, this watch, and white dial, and like we're like, I feel that it's going to cannibalize just in this exact example of Brody, right? Brody walks into an Omega AD. If this watch didn't exist, maybe he would have bought the Moon watch if he was looking for an Omega. Um, Now he walks into the AD, looks at the case, sees the Moon watch, knows about it, doesn't really give a fuck about NASA. Um, is looking at the white dial now and looking at this one and saying this one's a lot cooler, buys this one, right? So what did that do? That actually cannibalized the sale of the Moon watch, whether the white dial or the sapphire sandwich. And that's where I believe that they're going to sell a lot of these. I do feel that it's going to cannibalize some of their current lineup. And then it's like, because OC said, well, this is a positive gain from revenue from them, but I'm like, maybe it's not as, maybe it's not like just looking at the gross side of it. Yeah, you're selling 25,000 watches, but what if that's at the expense of 10,000 other, Moon watches, for example, that people don't buy, and you're really just, riding the wave of your current Moon watch buyers that now consider this. Who knows, right? I don't believe that this watch is necessarily going to enact a huge amount of excessive demand, I would say, to drive for it. I do believe there's going to be some demand, but I do believe some of that demand is already there from Moonwatch buyers or potentially even white dial buyers. So that's where I think that this watch is. Look, it's the nicest watch that nobody's going to care about next week. Is I stick by that statement. And look, like, 6 months down the track, like, if this watch is hyped, I'll be eating my words, but I don't see it, right? Like, I mean, is it going to be a watch that's nice and people like? Sure, like people like the No Time to Die as well. It's a nice watch, people like it, but you know, it's not a overly hyped. Oh my god, it's not this. It's not the Snoopy. It's not even the 321 is not a hyped watch. It's a very hard to get watch, but there's not an inherent enough a lot of hype, and you can get them on the secondary for really good prices. So, I mean, if you kind of weigh it out like that, I just don't see it, guys. And look, there's a shit ton of YouTubers out there, and you can see them all over that are spruiking this watch, like, oh my god, it's the greatest, God's gift to Speedmasters, and it's the greatest release. And I'm just like, what the fuck? I'm like, we're talking about a first Omega in space. We're not talking about the moon. Like when the moon watch went to a white dial, okay, I got it, right? And honestly, for me, the white dial's luster is very nice. I think it looks really cool, but over time, I think it's going to be forgotten, right? It's people are still going to gravitate to the black dial. They're still going to want the original. They're going to want the purest one. The white dial's still going to be nice, but is it going to be overly hyped? Probably not. It's an Omega, guys. Like it's really like let's break it down here, guys. We're talking about Omegas, and I've called a few collectors today, and I said, hey, what do you think of this watch? And they're like, there's not really that many Omegas I desire, and so I just wouldn't consider this watch. They're like, it's not the Moon watch. It's not a 3-2-1. What I said they should have done is I said that they should have put a 3-2-1 movement into this watch. The 3-2-1 is the historic movement that was in the original CK 2998. So if you really want to, if Omega, you really want to be true to whatever the fuck you're doing here, besides just aesthetically changing it, put the actual heartbeat back in the watch that was in the original, the CK2998. And then you're going to have a real kicker of a watch. And again, you should be able to charge more, right? So instead of a 10,000 price point, this becomes a 15,000 price point. The 321 Ed White, I think, is like, I'm talking Canadian dollars, guys, not US dollars, but I think it's around 18, maybe above $20,000 Canadian price point. So I would put this between the standard Moon watch, the Ed White at the top, which in and of itself is a classic design, and put this in there with a 321. Then you can charge more money. You're not cannibalizing your Moonwatch buyers, and or you're potentially upselling your Moonwatch buyers, right? Because again, a Moonwatch is almost the same price as this watch. You're upselling them by maybe 50%. So even if you're riding and you're cannibalizing those buyers, you're actually getting more revenue out of it by upselling them to this model. And you're actually putting a piece together that I think would be pretty hyped, pretty unique. That 321, if it went into production, I mean, everybody who's a true watch nerd, or even a Speedmaster nerd, to get a production level 321, to have somewhat more serially produced models, like that would be the coolest thing in the world. And I think that's where they failed here. I think putting the 3861 movement, basically putting it at the same level as the Moonwatch. I mean, the Moonwatch is a fucking titan. Like it is a Goliath in terms of being an icon. Like, you're talking like Submariner level icon here, the Moonwatch. in the viewpoint of collectors. So it's like, I mean, really, guys, like the first fucking Omega in space, who cares? Who cares about the first Omega in space? I care if it's the first watch in space. I don't care if it's the first fucking Omega in space. And that, boys and girls, is why all these other YouTubers, I think, are just either simping, either don't know what they're talking about, or fucking delusional fantasists, or just are bored, guys, and there's nothing else to talk about besides this watch. But them doing their simping gave me something to talk about, because outside of that, if they hadn't done that, if all these other YouTubers hadn't, glorified this watch as being so fucking good, I probably would have looked at this watch on monochrome, been like, nice watch, and then forgot about it, which is exactly what I'm going to do, guys. It's exactly what I'm going to do. The nicest watch that nobody's going to care about next week is what this is. Lucy, you got to take a photo whilst in the box, man. That's one of the, actually, my favorite lines. Green Man, they already have the Snoopy Dark Side and Ed White to upsell Moonwatch buyers. Absolutely, right? And I think even more so, Green Man, that the point of that is that they're even cannibalizing it further. You are right with the Dark Side of the Moon. The Ed White price point is significantly higher than the Moonwatch, and therefore it does price out. Like, if you could get a 321 in that watch, I think more buyers, there's still gonna be buyers that just want the 3861, but you will find a lot of buyers that want the 321 at the Moonwatch price point. So I think that lowering the price point of the 321 is going to make it more appealing. When you're thinking dark side of the moon, gray side of the moon, blue side of the moon, I mean, you're buying those watches for a similar, I guess, idea. It's a good point, Green Man, because you're buying, like maybe a ceramic version or an aventurine dial version, Speedmaster in those other iterations. And in this iteration, you're getting a steel case, but you're getting a different dial, right? So, it's kind of the same idea, but they're not upselling it. They're basically just adding, like, and then I'll just ask the question back to you, Green Man. Is it smarter to upsell it in a steel version that is significantly different than the dark side and the Ed White, I would say, or is it better to then put a competing model amongst its flagship? And I don't think that's smart fucking all, right? I mean, look at Rolex, right? Rolex has that, right? Look at the Submariner. We have the variants like the Sea Dweller, the Deep Sea Sea Dweller, right? Like, all it does is like really cannibalize, Submariner buyers, right? Like, does anybody really buy a fucking Deep Sea Dweller because they're going that far deep, or a Sea Dweller? Like, no, nobody's doing that, guys. Come on, right? You just want, either you couldn't get a Submariner and you bought that watch, or you have a bigger wrist and you want a 43 mil or a 44 mil, like, but you want a Submariner, right? Like, it's just taking away from people that would buy the Submariner. If those watches didn't exist, those people that, maybe trying to find other compromises or other choices, I don't believe they would go to other brands. I think they would stick with Rolex. I don't think that they would just be like, well, fuck, it's 40 mils too small, so I'm going to go to a fucking Blancpain 50 Fathoms. Nah, man. Those guys are buying Rolex no matter what. They would have bought Submariners, right? So in those cases, in the case of the Sea Dweller and the Deep Sea Sea Dweller, they are more expensive models, right? So they do theoretically upsell. So they don't necessarily compete at the same price point, and therefore don't cannibalize the Submariner. And that's why Rolex did it, is they do charge more for those, and they do differentiate them. So it doesn't really, if they're going to lose business on the Submariner, they're going to, definitely going to try to make a bit more money out of it, I would say. Dr. Bob's Nightmare says they knocked it out of the park. Next, Loose Tooth Tan, you see the Periscope opinions on Nick Foltz in the Submariner book. I've heard about it. Periscope writes some really fucking long articles, man, and I've read a lot of them. I do. Fuck, I'm trying to remember what people told me about that one. If you want to put it in the chat, Loose Tooth, you can jog my memory. But I do know the Periscope has. I think it was centered around like Rolex's claim that the Submariner was the first water resistant dive watch, or something like that. First water resistant. It was some kind of a claim. I don't know if it directly is related to the Submariner, or if it was related to the Oyster itself. And look, I guess my punchline to this, Loose Tooth, is after I heard this story, and I really don't remember because I've been spending a lot of time talking about like fucking 100 topics with collectors today. When it comes to this, like, whether, I think his whole thing was about firsts. Let's give you an example. The Zenith and El Primero, the first automatic chronograph. I owned a Seiko speed timer automatic chronograph with a serial number from March 1969. Okay, that's the year that the El Primero, I believe, was released at Basel. Okay, or showcased at Basel. I mean, Basel is a show that happens, I believe, in March. I think it's March, March or April, right? But I had a production Seiko on my wrist from March 1969. So the question is that, like, people know the El Primero is not the first, or it's got a bit of a questionable past of it being the first. The real answer is nobody really gives a fuck, right? Like, I mean, sure, Perescope will point out a footnote that's wrong or whatever. Like, I don't think most people would care. Basically, a lot of nitpicking and kind of slagging Mr. Folks for being uninformed. Like, this is what these guys do. These armchair fucking authors do, right? And armchair vloggers. I mean, I like Perescope. I like the work he's done. But that's what they do, right? That's where he picks up. And I think that there was some connection with Young Brando, actually. Someone told me. So shout out to Young Brando. He's cool. I like Young Brando. Lord's a friend of mine. But I think that, like, Perescope again, well, I don't disagree that he could be right. And I'm sure he is. My point, I guess, loose tooth is, like, really, does anybody care? Like, okay, he puts in that it's the first water resistant whatever. It's like Rolex's claim about the fucking Rolex Explorer, and its tie to Everest, right? Like, what the Rolex Explorer is, and full disclosure, I'm wearing one on the wrist right now, Explorer 40, Explorer 40, Explorer 40. Like, it's a commemorative watch. Like, the Explorer never went up Mount Everest. There's questionable there's this questionable history around, was the Oyster Perpetual that was given to Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary, was that even worn up Everest, right? Or was it in a backpack, or was it in a pocket or whatever, right? But the Explorer is simply a commemorative watch to that expedition. You know what I mean? So even though Rolex talks about it, and people like to believe when they have it on the wrist that this watch would be totally fine on their trek up to Everest, that they'll never do. But, like, the question is, the real question I'm asking you, loose tooth, is most people don't care. They don't care that the Explorer didn't go up Everest. They still fucking buy those watches because they like them, right? They don't care. So anyways, guys, almost 2.5 hours of watch talk. We got Archie Luxury coming up in about 2 hours and minutes. I'm a little burnt out from the watch talk. I appreciate the original OC hopping on, keeping me company for 2 hours. Look, guys, I think I'm done talking about the Omega first Omega in space. We'll see how this watch looks in about 6 months, whether people are simping over it or whether people have forgotten it. My hot take is people are going to forget about this watch very, very soon. And yeah, guys, I will see you guys next time. Have yourselves a great afternoon and a great weekend. Take care.